Starting when?
So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Specposium Day 2.
Should we leave the sort of introductory bit just a few minutes closer to the time?
Sure.
Just as we've got a solid 7 minutes stretching ahead of us.
Recording hasn't started yet, has it?
Yes, it has.
Oh,
one of the recordings has, yeah.
I'll just
But they can cut it out in post. Don't worry.
But yeah, I do tend to we do tend to have more time in these sort of 10-minute slots than we actually need because it's quite quick to introduce everything. But it's good for getting recordings set up and sorted and things. I've lost my little PowerPoint slide of the little critter saying "Welcome to Spec." But where are they? Please, day one. There we go.
Has everyone remembered to get like a snack and a drink, maybe?
Yep, I've got my juice at the ready.
Oh, that reminds me, I can get some brekkie.
I debated making coffee, but it'll take so long.
I mean, somebody in chat's apparently boiling a dozen eggs, so that's snack time sorted for everyone. Oh, I think this is a much better starting time of being 2 hours later, so you're not up before at the crack of dawn. Right, should we do our dramatic announcements now, or wait another couple minutes? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Specposium 2022 Day 2. The sequel. So, as per usual, if you keep yourself muted during talks, and we'll go through one presentation at a time. If there's any technical difficulties, we do have breaks throughout the day to sort of act as buffers, so everybody should still be on time. The timetable is given in UTC/GMT, so just add or subtract how many hours ahead of UTC or behind UTC you are to make sure you're in, so you don't miss any talks that you want to see. And I think that's all we've got for the announcements.
Groovy. So, hopefully we wait for, when we hit 8 o'clock, we're going to, when we hit the hour, we're going to start our first presentation.
Which is the world of Nijin-Konai, and which is all about ichthyomorphs and their evolution. Oh, and if anybody's accidentally making noise during the chats, you will get automatically muted by one of the mods. And if you want to be unmuted for asking questions later, just ask. You're never muted because you've done anything wrong or anything like that. You just get so you know, it's fine if you get muted. We can unmute you at any time that you need to talk. Right, Italian Paleo Girl, do you want to get your presentation up and ready?
Sure thing. Do I start streaming now?
Yep, I'll stop my stream.
Is it okay to start?
Absolutely, fire away.
Okay. So, welcome to Nijin-Konai, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Lorenzo Battilani, a scholar in the field of natural sciences and vertebrate paleontology, and today I'm going to introduce the 8-year-old project of Nijin-Konai, a planet not only made to showcase alien life, but aimed at educating people on sciences and modern issues in ecology and environmentalism. Nijin-Konai is the 5th planet orbiting the star of Nijin Large. Larger than Earth, with a radius of 11,510 kilometers, this overall warm planet is home to a plethora of unique organisms, adapted to live in situations unhospitable to humankind. With an overall mean temperature of 23.06 degrees Celsius or 68.1 degrees Fahrenheit, this planet is quite warmer than Earth. Too warm, in fact, for the formation of natural ice caps or to have similarly high oxygen concentrations in the atmosphere. The F-type star it orbits around is particularly active, bombarding the planet with a constant influx of harmful radiation, up to 6,000 microsieverts a day, in absence of solar storms. This high radiation is also directly responsible for the hyposaline conditions of the planet by dismantling carbonate compounds already scarce on it. At time of high solar activity, the planet can live through almost weekly solar storms of low magnitude, powerful enough to force life to hide, but not strong enough to cause large-scale ecological damage. To predict and survive these storms, life developed organs able to perceive changes in UV levels and in the planet's magnetic field, with enough precision to allow them to get to safety before it hits. From forests retracting onto the ground, animals finding refuge in the water, underground, or even using the plants themselves as elevators, in a span of a few minutes, a lush forest can become a barren desert. The planet has seen intelligent life both develop and colonize it before humanity. Around 32 million years ago, a native zoophont developed, called the Lulmanu, who thrived on the northern continent for a few thousand years before their extinction. Yet in the picture you can see, like on the left, a Lulmanu changing posture depending on need, based on reshuffling of a hyperdense liquid in an organ called a filtration sac, which allows them to change their point of gravity, shift it around the body. A few thousand years before human colonization, the planet was home to an unnamed alien zoophont, now unknown if still extant or not, the legacy of which are synthetic beings called the Shivohai. Humanity is thus just another chapter in the life of a planet that has now hosted 3 Sophon civilizations. The scarcity of salts on the planet, coupled with the high background radiation, forced life to go great strides to adapt from its early beginnings. Specialized skeletal structures and a subcutaneous circulatory system developed to allow life to stockpile salts and optimize osmoregulation, bioelectrical signaling, buoyancy, and more, while redundancies in the genome for genes like RAD51 in charge of gene repair and the development of specialized enzymes like TRSE beta F54 DNA prostatase that coil around and shield the genome became a necessity for life on the surface to withstand the harmful side of ionizing radiation. But although life was able to adapt to normal conditions, it cannot survive uncommon meteorological events, such as the quite frequent solar storms. Around each 110 million years, more or less, the star reaches a peak in activity, one so large as to produce an anomalous solar storm, which upon reaching the planet, scorches its surface and eradicates most of what lives on it. These cyclical mass extinction events are called megafaunal cycles, and are roughly as severe as the Big Dying was on Earth at the Permian-Triassic boundary. When simulating this event, it's imperative to take into consideration short-term effects and long-term ones as well. What might survive the first impact of the solar storms will also have to endure catastrophic ecological collapses and a range of other life-threatening changes that will occur. One such example that drives extinction in the planet's deep sea, where radiation usually doesn't reach, is the interruption of the oxygen stairway that moves nutrients and oxygen into the deep sea. As surface floating forests perished, the influx of nutriment traveling down in the water column also interrupts, and the global nepheloid layers get impoverished. As oxygen concentrations in the deep ocean plummet, most life there, adapted to these high oxygen levels, also perish or are forced to move further up in the water column, where they are, for the most part, killed by the high radiation. Another long-term effect of these solar storms is carbonate critical minimums. As the solar storms destroys carbonate compounds in the surface waters, the already brackish oceans of Nijin-Konai become even less saline, putting the already salt-starved organisms on the planet in a situation where most of their osmoregulatory processes become compromised, sometimes to the point of inverting function, hemorrhaging salts into the surrounding hypotonic liquid, a situation that also is responsible for great loss in biodiversity. Even though this may seem tragic at first, each time life grows anew from the survivors into new and amazingly weird forms. The last megafaunal cycle that ended 32 million years ago brought an end not only to animals and plants, but also to the native zoophont of the planet, the Lulmanu, that went extinct roughly at what we would call the Late Iron Age. This mass extinction event was particularly bad and also brought an end to the reign of a large superclass of ectomorphs called the Netodons, who today, while still being very important in the ecosystems, globally are just a mere shadow of what they once were. Nonetheless, the planet's life is thriving in the water, on land and in the air, and today humanity coexists with it more or less peacefully. Due to the different planetary conditions, Nijin-Konai developed unique environments and habitats unseen on Earth. From giant floating forests that feed the deep sea by creating the so-called nepheloid layers and the oxygen stairway.
Quick note, are the slides supposed to be advancing because we're still on the guy going fishing slide?
For now, it's just a guy going fishing.
Yeah. Excellent. Continue.
I was saying... oxygen stairway, yeah. To surface evanescent forests, jungle that only exist at night when a Nijin lush set. These evanescent forests are nocturnal in nature, as they are placed around the tropics, where during the day radiation and the radiation coming from the star is harmful to the plants themselves, so they might wait until the light goes down to gather up and do radiosynthesis with the remaining lower radiation during the night. Another rather unique environment that emerged in Nijin-Konai is the ice sheets, formed not thanks to temperatures being low enough for water to freeze, but because of an organism. This so-called bacterial ice is created by a microbial organism that, thanks to a series of chemicals, can artificially force water to freeze at higher temperatures. Adaptation developed to fixate the salts inside the water and to create cultivation grounds for it to breed faster and more efficiently. This warm ice cap created a unique environment where the ice is a predator and prey to an ecosystem in which it is both at the top and bottom of the trophic chain. This ice cap is the oldest and largest microorganism on the planet, and the deepest parts of the colony formed millions of years ago. These environments, in turn, host a range of organisms, the likes of which Earth has never seen, occupying spaces in the trophic chains that Earth never had. This here is the International Stratigraphic Chart of Nijin-Konai, the version that was published in 2575 by the NKCS, the Nijin-Konai Commission of Stratigraphy, and it shows the last 800 million years of life's history on the planet, i.e. the moment in which multicellular life became widespread. From the third column to the left, so where you see the periods, you can see the major changes from one megafaunal cycle to the next, every roughly 100 million years. But now, how does this all translate into education? By presenting issues humanity faces coexisting with these animals, I offer a view of relevant modern topics in a fictional context, away from environmental stresses coming from the real world, putting into perspective what happens today here on Earth. Discussing environmentalism is not always easy, as a large range of misconceptions developed over the years about what it means to be environmentally friendly or what the environment and ecology are and work. By applying concepts of ecology to my world building and explaining their processes, I hope to debunk some such misconceptions. One of the focal points I bring forth in my world building is the importance to find a balance between human activity and the environment around us, and as the solution does not lie in the removal of human elements in an environment, but in striking a balance between them. The topics I discuss are not just about how the organism is interacting with humans, but also the political, economical, and sometimes cultural implications of human behavior towards a certain species. Some problems don't stop at the action harming the animal itself, but are the result of conflicting interests, both direct and indirect, which often offer complications in the protection of these animals, some of which are not to be taken lightly. As many modern-day issues are also present on the planet, I can explain what happens to our environments through this alien setting, while also talking of environmental issues unique to Nijin-Konai. Hypothetical problems that don't exist in real life, but still feel real. One such widespread unique environmental threat on Nijin-Konai is salt pollution, as almost all the planet's life is quite stenohyaline and thus unable to survive changing salinity concentrations. Human interactions with the environment are raising the water's salinity ever more, and the looming threat of widespread biodiversity loss drives many people to take action and invest in more advanced treatment facilities. In this picture, we can see a fishing boat off the western coast of the Jisho Islands, finding the bloated carcass of a Chaeroprosopin strophinx during a storm, one of many families of organisms on the Nijin-Konai that today are threatened to go extinct due to climate change and human interaction. Although, importantly, the climate shift is happening naturally here. But what lies under the surface? The organisms I showcase are not the result of creature design, but of a careful simulation of what life might develop in a span of 800 million years. From the first unicellular organism more than 3 billion years ago to the present day, these organisms have been developed step by step. The priority, while developing them, was their plausibility, which doesn't translate to Earth-like forms always. By being more or less acquainted with their genetics, I was able to create a custom Evo-Devo gene toolkit for life on the Nijin-Konai, one that allowed me to set custom rules and limits to what life on this planet might accomplish. Differences in Hox genes make the development of body parts more flexible, and the expression of DLL-like genes, distal-less, specifically are responsible for the varying limb count in organisms such as the fish-like ictuniums. Moreover, by keeping relative track of allelic powers in the animals' populations, I was also able to predict evolutionary potential at a community level, to better simulate speciation regionally. One such example of this is the allele that expresses the rigidity of the tuberculin in etodons, trunk-like appendages formed by the prolapsed esophagus of the creature. Rigid tubercula are often associated with scavenging and seafloor foraging taxa, and have appeared mostly in gymnocephalians, while more flexible tubercula are more characteristic of open water and under-reef hunters, more commonly seen among tuberculous stomatosians. However, just because these characters are most seen in one group, it doesn't mean they can't exist in another. Basogymnocephalian taxa from the southeast witnessed a shift in allelic dominance around 50 million years ago, when the stiff tuberculous alleles gave way to the flexible tuberculous expression in response to a heavy loss of biodiversity due to a shifting climate. These alleles were already present in these populations, just they weren't dominant. The taxa that resulted from this shift are elephantotuberculatins and mictrivellins, which today have mostly outcompeted the stiff tuberculate gymnocephalians of the coasts. The close to no existence of the flexible tuberculous allele in stiff tuberculated gymnocephalians is important to consider when developing these organisms, as it influences what these animals can develop based on their genetic package. These gymnocephalians won't be able to develop a flexible tuberculus to fight off the competition, as they lack the genetic potential to do so. Thus, they adapt in different ways to survive, be it migrating elsewhere, focusing their diet in partition, becoming more efficient osmotically, etc. This doesn't mean that new alleles cannot appear in populations. It just means that they do not have the little genetic package ready to be used. So it takes more time for them to adapt in a similar fashion. This attention to detail, although rigorous, leaves space for these organisms to have biological flaws, sometimes quite severe, coming from their genetic heritage. As organisms, even on Earth, are quite flawed, shying away from having flaws at all only detracts from the believability of life that lives on the Nijin-Konai. How do these organisms dance around their shortcomings? Flaws are a drive for behavioral change, which in turn is a drive for more adaptations to occur. It is with this in mind that I am also able to educate not only on the environment, but also transmit knowledge in other fields such as biology, genetics, ethology, and biochemistry. As more organisms appear, they all fit in a large cladistic tree, where now thousands of organisms lie at the species level. To make the whole cladistic tree feel more alive, you may notice some names are either spelled incorrectly or using a wrong naming criterion. These changes are the result of world building and are tied not only to humanity's story, but also to a historical rediscovery of binomial naming systems. When humans first set foot on the Nijin-Konai in 2353, they had little to no recollection of their historical heritage. Desperate to reclaim what was lost in 2085 with the Rapture, an alien species that enslaved humanity for almost 3 centuries, humans started adopting a back system they were still not quite sure how they once worked. Among such things were nomenclature criteria and naming, originally done mostly in a wrong, pure Latin system. It was only as time passed that they stopped emulating the little they had and started understanding what people hundreds of years prior were doing, including the usage of other languages in the naming and better spelling. This allows an interested reader with a bit of background knowledge of the world to approximate the time of description of an organism based on the name alone. Organisms are not just developed and put into a list. The naming itself and speciation are due to a series of diagnostic characteristics which may be more or less apparent, from clear macromorphological changes to much smaller adaptations invisible without detailed analysis of the bone structures and soft tissues. The difference between the genus Kugawa and Proto-Kugawa, as an example, doesn't lie in very visible changes in the anatomy, but instead originates in differences in the endocranium. Proto-Kugawa is defined by a reduced jugal bone and an extension of the maxillary diastema that opens the inner first eye socket. The external squamosal process of the quadratomandibula, appearing a bit like a handle in the back of an ichthyomops skull, is ventrolaterally compressed, and the lacrimal arch doesn't extend beyond the postorbital suture where there is a reduced squamosal plate. These listed above, which may sound like a word salad to some, are just a very few characters that define what Proto-Kugawa is and differentiate it from other closely related genera. To minimize my own biases, the most in the development of life, I relinquish control over the project, allowing it to run itself and limiting myself to be an observer of its ever-changing nature. Perhaps a bit difficult to explain, by not planning the organisms, I avoid forcing an outcome on them that might be artificial. By evolving whole ecosystems at a time, I avoid compartmentalizing organisms and can better observe interspecific interactions, as multiple organisms live together and have to adapt not only to physical changes in the environment, but also other organisms that are changing alongside it and them. By rerunning the same simulations several times and logging the results, I can see several potential outcomes based on small differences and notice if any patterns are emerging. In no way does this make my project perfect or free from biases, but by doing this, I hope I can minimize them as much as possible for a single person. This lack of control over the project's direction is vital in allowing the planet's life to breathe and develop in ways I may have never thought of. Sometimes, though, two closely related groups may develop similar adaptations while branching from a common ancestor. It is very important for me to recognize what is synapomorphic and what is homoplastic in these cases to delineate their relations properly. To do so, rigorous analysis of the development of these structures is required. Sometimes the key factor in understanding all of this could be microscopical. Returning to the Kugawa example before, Kugawas have several mandibles arranged in pairs. These mandibles originated from the unfusion of the mandibular symphysis and the development of the lanial costae, small bones under the animal's chin used in mastication, into limbs. Although they might seem identical, the microstructure of the bone composing the first mandibular pair and the one from the second to third one is very different, a testament to the phylogenetic origin of these characters and their growth. Although this example is not strictly relevant to defining homoplasies, I still use it as it holds value in explaining how similar things can be very different once seen very close. Each species I illustrate for the project is from the present day, discovered by humanity. Each of them has a story to tell, and each of them offers insight into the planet and its life. For how small they might be, each of them has a role in where they live in. Even the smallest species, in fact, can be a keystone to the environment they live in, and that should not be underestimated. I would argue in certain cases, the smaller ones are the most important. Each week, I post one such story from one of the 1,600 plus taxa that have been sketched so far, adding a piece to the ever-growing puzzle of life on the Nijin-Konai and human interaction with it. As you may have noticed during this presentation, the life seen here has been mostly fish-like in shape. This is because I'm currently producing an in-depth book describing hundreds of species from this fish-like subphylum called Ichthyomorpha. This, however, is only the first step in the story of Nijin-Konai, as a whole series is in the works. each focusing on a different phylum of organisms, each describing hundreds of species from their respective phyla, making it a book chain worthy of being called speculative evolution, with thousands of different organisms illustrated at the end of it. I'm so grateful for your attention and the faith hundreds of people have put in this project these last few years since I started publishing in 2020. I wouldn't be here without you all lending me your ears. I salute you from Nijin-Konai. Hope to see you all here soon.
Wow.
Amazing stuff.
All
The
right.
absolute scale of
Wow.
it.
No.
Yeah, the scale is just oof. That
The scale is just like immense.
and that was
absolutely
and that is
amazing.
a truly massive phylogeny. That's the type of phylogeny that they have to display as a circle because there are so many taxa.
I have, however,
Yeah, there
found
are.
one
You have no
fatal
idea.
flaw. I could not find the best boy.
Well, I'm so
Which
sorry
one?
I posted it.
The
But like,
Sandmaker.
Oh, I don't have any questions because it was so well said, everything. So well explained.
I guess my only question is, when might we expect to see the books? If you
Yeah,
have
yeah, that, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so the first book, the one on Nyctiomorpha, is right now in production, meaning I'm writing it not as we speak, obviously, because I need all the concentration here. But each second of free time I have, I'm dedicating into writing the book. I don't have an estimated release date yet, but the illustrations for all 500 plus organisms in that will be featured are already complete. I just need to write it and put them in.
Good.
Just toss it to your
Can't
brother.
wait.
Wow.
Yeah, but like, this is the coolest thing.
Like I did my usual thing and I read the whole thing at 0.9 C. So I think we have still time for a few questions if there are any.
Yeah, we have time for questions. About five more minutes, and we actually have a break after this. So, if you have any question at all, feel free to ask.
I have so many questions and I can't formulate them just because the sim that you're working with, I can't comprehend how that works. Do you have just a giant matrice of all of the genes that you could potentially play with, or how do you simulate all of that evolution?
Yeah, and do you have like an epigenetic thing too of like what ones are turned off and turned on and all that across the generations?
Yes.
I do keep track of all of this. I don't have much of it in file format, however, because I worked most of my time in an analogic format, so paper. Like you don't want to know how much paper I have on all of this, but I do keep
like,
track of the
breaking all of the furniture paper.
Yeah, I do keep track of the genetic the epigenetic charts for all of the organisms. Usually, I gave little names and acronyms to the most important ones, like you've seen for the tuberculous in the example I gave, to make sure I remember which one is which. A bit like you label. Like you abbreviate in figures the names of bones and other characters, and then I have like a little table where I switch on. I keep which ones are switched on and off in relation to families and then in species. The simulation is a bit hard to explain in the sense that it's not a program I put some files in and just click run. It's something I do basically just using my head with time and time again. I just
manual simulation.
Paper. Yeah, I do my simulation
all
right
in-
there. Try to
all
imagine
in
like
the-
organisms coming in and out, keeping track of all the things that are happening, logging them on the paper so I don't forget things, because otherwise I'm gonna forget things.
I remember the first time you ever told me about this like very new project. You had it like in a dream. Like you were like, "Oh, Alice, I dreamt about alien life. It would be so cool to have a project about it, wouldn't it?"
Yeah, but it started a bit like that, but yeah, like that's not the point though here.
No, but it's so cool. It all started as a dream.
Okay, it kind of started with me imagining, like dreaming about a planet there and wanting to explore it and saying like, okay, let's take this out, try to find its physical, like to reconstruct its physical structure, try to see how it might work with a star like this, and let's see what happens. And then from there it evolved into this. About 8 years now.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, you really have like the biggest imagination ever.
I wouldn't say that.
That's a very cool ability. And if you mix it with your knowledge of science, I just know it will become a great, an even greater project. It's already great. It will become even greater.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the things? Did I answer the question before? I have a tendency to stray around. And
Yes.
Okay.
You have a polychordate skeleton. Show these fine people.
Oh, okay. I'll show them a polychordate skeleton.
Prepare to have your minds blown retroactively.
I guess people can see here which ones are the people that have been following me. Okay. Changing screen quickly. This is a skeleton of Kika Kika, a type of small reptile. Like they have, so they are called polychordates for a reason. They have their body is built by 6 different spines. Like it helps in bioelectrical channeling. It works for like the calcium deposits. And it gives it's also a way they have to place where they attach the happy and hypoaxial muscles along the body, given that they have 2 major cavities, one ventral, one dorsal, compared to our fishes where they only have a ventral cavity and then the rest of the body is dedicated to the musculature.
Look at this dude. He's hogging all the spines.
Hogging all the spines. These animals breathe through the tail. Yeah, that's called a gill tail. The diamond shape thing that you see. It's where around 20 nostrils are positioned, that they move the fluid into a ventral sac called the filtration sac and into a lung-like structure in the upper cavity.
Him be sniffing, yo.
They are the respiration is a bit complicated because it works on several factors. They don't just have one system that takes in air or separates free oxygen from the water. They also have what's called a subcutaneous circulatory system, which is attached to the filtration sac in the belly area and works as a second circulation that goes throughout all the body, and it's vital for them as it allows them to aid in respiration, osmoregulation, even thermoregulation, as the excitement of the water molecules in there is one of the major factors that derives their internal temperature. It's also used in buoyancy and it has a few uses really. Like many systems in a real life animals, they don't exist just for one reason.
Yeah.
Whoops! I stopped the streaming.
Did the land-based creatures come from those, or are those like the ones that returned to water?
So the land-based creatures come from several. There are several phyla that invaded land over time. Ichthyosaurs, these ones specifically, only did once in recent times. The ones you saw, like the Lilmanu, the Sophons, are actually part of the same phylum, the Polychordata, but not the subphylum Ichthyomorpha is placed in. So it's they are related in a way, not directly. And most life on land now is polychordate, not Ichthyomorph. If we don't talk about the pleuropods, which is another phylum, much bigger, much more diverse, but that's for the second book, one thing at a time.
Right.
Anything else?
If it's my place to say, I really love the. I've noticed a recent movement in speculative biology to make things as realistic as possible, and it's one that I like. But I've also noticed that a lot of people then kind of start looking down on spec designs just for the sake of creature design or soft spec and
Yeah.
stuff. But
I've faced some of that.
But let me just say that the fact that you're using actual simulations to do this is what I initially wanted to do with Solotum and was never able to do. So like seeing this actually like executed is like a fever dream come true.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Agreed.
Personally, I have nothing against the creature design part of it. There are some beautiful creations that are absolutely 100% creature design. I don't see why it's seen as inferior in any way. There's a lot of creativity that also has to go in if you want to make something looking appealing, even if you don't care about the science behind it. I don't understand that part.
I am at the heart of it a fantasy animal designer, so I very much appreciate that sort of humbleness that you have, Paleo, about just rolling with it and just being like, that's pretty.
We embrace all
Very
sides.
important question. Could you make them into fish sticks?
Into
fish
fish sticks?
Real question.
Oh, I have actually several recipes for these animals and how they taste like.
Oh no.
Okay, I like the
Kind of like plant.
And we also get a cookbook.
That was
Yeah,
one
you
of my little things I would have loved to make. Here in my stream right now, I have a picture of the raw ingredients needed to prepare a flower-scented sugaro in the way they do in the northern Elder's Cape. So, if you live around the northern side of the Terran Union, this is probably what your grandma prepares you.
Yeah, I live
Please
there.
tell me that
What
you
did you
have
know?
Bali burgers here somewhere.
Bali burgers.
Yes.
This is the cooked version. Once ready, prepared with the
little sauce.
Okay,
that's
how are you
very
gonna
nice.
make me hungry for alien fish?
We'll be serving this at the first in-person Specposium.
Yes.
the food potion.
I
Not,
hope it's given
not a
no
question.
salt at all.
I just want to compliment the stratigraphic charts you had. Me and the other paleontologists in the chat were all like, "Oh, a stratigraphy sequence. We like that sort of thing."
I based it on the ones that my paleontology professor gave me when I was in university, that she liked to call the Bible. So
Yeah, I remember that.
Based.
So I based it on that one as well. I also kind of used the same terminology on the side to define the GSSPs, and which, by the way, those GSSPs are not put there at random. I actually have pinpointed on the map where those were taken, where the strata are most visible and most diagnostic of the period and age. So I like to do this kind of things because the geology part of me just goes crazy for these things.
I also love a lot how you created the sophons and how they don't do war upon each other, just on the big fishes, the big ichthyomorphs.
They had larger things to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. Like we are actually, but we still do war for some reason.
Let's not turn it into that kind of discussion because
It's like a species full
No,
of
it's
emu warriors.
Yeah, it's very cool, this thing you did.
One such example of something they had to worry about is here. This is a horrendous beach crawler. Around 32 million years ago, ambushing a young male, Lilmano.
Don't call it horrendous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Very
That's my
beautiful and
son.
also
Show-
terrifying.
Yeah.
Show the bone worm.
Well, if we don't want to call it, if we don't want to call it horrendous, we can call it for its genus name, Igalotherian. Boneworm.
My favorite one, just about.
Yeah, this is both this and the one I'm about to show are from the previous megafaunal cycle, so they are technically extinct today.
Oh wow.
Okay, change screen again. Up, Boneworm.
Ooh, this is
Oh.
creepy and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
Of which I have actually a cranial anatomy also done, so people can see where the head stops, because it's what
such a
you
silly
think
guy.
of the neck. What you think of the neck is actually the head. He is a silly guy.
So in the interest of time, we're scheduled to start the next presentation in a couple minutes. So I'd like to allow a couple minutes for Heath to restart recording to make sure that it's all going well.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for joining.
And stopping recording. And starting recording.
All going well?
Yeah, all's going well.
Excellent.
So next up is Zach's talk on life in an infinite universe.
Is my microphone working?
It is now, yeah.
It is.
Oh, that's quite a tough one to follow. Just give me a sec. Is that working?
Yep.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Suddenly quite nervous. Yeah, this is basically a project I've been working on since like I was about 15. It originally started like it's just a superhero kind of Marvel-y world. Got a lot more into medieval fantasy. So I incorporated a lot of tropes from those genres, like Game of Thrones, and I think Skyrim as well was a big influence. A lot of people talk about like top-down and bottom-up spec. I kind of approach it as like a paleontology, but like as a creative side to it. So everything's all tentative and everything's always constantly in flux. So nothing is ever final. And the whole premise is that you don't know what's outside of the observable universe. So there's no reason why that would be the edge of all existence. So you don't have to go into like the quantum side of the multiverses and stuff. You can just say if the universe is big enough, what is possible becomes probable. So star system, you don't really need to know any of this, but it's there. That was like one of the first things I kind of cemented in, was like just getting numbers on like how much light is coming off the star, what the habitable zone is, like what the orbit is going to be, because it's a binary system. Someone ran it through like an N-body simulator, and it ended up with like really crazy, like erratic orbits. And so what you actually get is instead of like regular seasons, you'll get periods of like 10 years or so where the orbit is like a lot. The orbit's a lot greater than it usually would be. So you end up with like global winters, like that span like over the period of a decade, which actually ended up working like Game of Thrones. Generally, it's about the same. It's slightly bigger than Earth, slightly less dense. It's kind of like in between Mars and Earth, where the iron core is pretty small, but it's compensated by a large moon. Because of that, the iron content in the crust is actually higher than you would expect on Earth, and iron happens to be one of the limiting minerals for like the ocean productivity. So basically, the result is like super productive, super warm temperature, like super productive oceans. That's photo of Earth, just like the equivalent photo on the planet. So you can see it's like quite a bit dimmer. It's continents, pretty straightforward. Don't need to talk too much about those. Basically, there's a lot that I haven't explored yet, like the octopods kind of came before tetrapods, and so they filled a lot of the predator niches. And then you kind of get the whistle-stop tour of like, this is basically more or less the same as Earth. You can see like as the continents broke apart, they kind of split apart in different ways. So you get like a lot of pseudosuchians and a lot of mammals are being isolated in the south, and then they're kind of radiating outwards until eventually you end up with like whole groups of mammals that otherwise didn't exist. So you end up with mammals and dinosaurs coexisting. And like because of the craziness of the orbits, the south continents get really erratic. And so like there's a lot of like for instance, like the developmental plasticity is super high in a lot of these animals, and like their like hair growth is stimulated by the ambient temperature. And then we get to today, which is into the more fun stuff. You see there's like a bit more fleshed out. There's only a few species that I've kind of mapped fully. Taxonomy trees. You see it's very similar to what you would see on Earth, but there's because of the different evolutionary history, like there's certain like photosynthesis is a big thing that was like basically basal to most animals. And so when you actually do the maths on sort of animals with like wide surface areas, you end up with quite crazy forms, like photosynthesizing whales. And again, mammals, you see a lot of similar animals, but they're kind of branched from completely different periods of like in time. And so you have like sloths are monotremes, bats are monotremes, and they have like all wings, and the secondary wings are used as like stabilizers, a bit like flies. Photosynthesis, basically the idea of this is just running calculations to give you sort of parameters of like how to design. You see the end result is that because of the distance and the slightly larger star, you end up with about half as much light energy. And then again, bioenergetics, just calculating really rough estimates of how much each creature needs to live, or like, and comparing it to Earth animals as well gives you a good sense of like if it's plausible or not. And so again, like these are like the ray whales. They're very heavily based on blue whales, which happen to be quite well studied. You can kind of see the efficiency from the tag data, and so the photosynthetic properties of these basically allow them to, under optimal conditions, kind of generate about a fifth to a quarter of their daily needs, which is what allows them to be quite a bit bigger than you would otherwise expect. Again, you can do like surface area calculations, get sort of roughly how much energy these are producing, and it turns out it's quite a bit more than I expected. Again, like mass estimates are quite straightforward because most cells are made of water, and water doesn't really compress. And so, generally speaking, you're going to get a density close to 1. So as soon as you get the volume, you kind of know how big the animal's actually going to be. Yeah, trees, because the lower gravity and the higher surface area, the higher atmospheric density, a 10-meter tall tree on Earth can take water as efficiently as a 160-meter tree on this planet. So these are things like when you actually nail down some of the properties of the planet, it kind of dramatically changes what's possible. And because the compressive strength of wood is actually really high, so water seems to be the limiting factor. So at the moment, these trees are probably like 150, 250 meters tall. Theoretically, I think they can be double that. But yeah, so these basically grow like they'll branch outwards and then kind of grow in like clusters, and then those clusters will kind of form over the top, and they'll kind of drown out all the trees underneath, and they'll starve those trees of light, absorb all the nutrients in that area, and then because of the branching structure and the way they form, there's a lot of internal space and a lot of internal branching, which incentivizes animals to then kind of set up habitats inside those branches, which then again further concentrates the collection of nutrients in those within its kind of core. Again, like phycoerythrin is quite a common pigment in plants, so that's why a lot of them are more red, which is also, I believe, a slightly fluorescent pigment.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're nearing the end of the time slot.
Yes. Okay. Basically, headbus. Lots of stuff to do. Early sketches started off quite crap, and then just like blocking out stuff in 3D gives you a really good idea. You can sculpt something in ZBrush or like Sculptress, drag it into 3ds Max. It'll tell you the mass, the volume, the surface area. You can create a center point that tells you the center of mass, not the center of gravity of the animal, and then that kind of gives you can infer ecology from those numbers, and it also helps when you're refining kind of mass sizes and proportions. Flight again, I'll try and mix with these available afterwards, but like there's a lot of studies on flight. You can basically get basically you end up with like pterosaurs are a lot bigger, something like nearly approaching like 8 meters in height. I'll skip these. Some maps I'll skip. Yeah, that was a bit of a mess. I'm sorry, this is my first time. But yeah, that's more or less it.
Thanks very much. You've had a lot of positive feedback in the banter channel. Do we have time for one quick question, and then we move on to the next presentation?
Yeah.
Don't think we have any questions yet. Lots of praise, though.
Yeah. So I skipped over like a lot of the rationale of those, but the kind of gist of it is I can go back and see like these are what I started with. This was initial creature designs, and then as you kind of plug in data, yep.
Can I see the image? You quickly scrolled by an image of someone mounted on an animal. I'm really curious to see that one.
That was just an early kind of concept So I do actually have a lot of like the human migrations mapped because great apes migrated to the supercontinent, supersized, and so humans are actually insular giants. And the giants themselves were quite widespread. A lot of giant culture actually stems from mammoths. There's a lot of kind of co-survival between the two, and so a lot of human culture in turn actually stems from mammoth behavior,
Really
which is
beautiful art.
Nice.
kind of the idea behind that.
Some stuff. Right.
But
The
yeah, a
next
lot of
talk
this is
by...
quite old.
All right, cool.
Yep,
so we're
so-
running a little over time, so let's move on to our next presenter, Dan Bensen with Junction, a Patchwork World.
Hi everyone. It's okay. I don't mind starting a little bit late. Are we okay to continue?
Yes, absolutely. Start sharing your presentation.
All right, you can hear me and everything? All right, I will share my presentation, but in the banter, I'm also sharing the link to go there, because there are links there that you might want to see. But I will share my presentation right now.
Excellent.
I'll share my screen, that is. Here we are. I want to share the entire screen, yes. All right. Okay, can everyone see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yep. You are visible.
All right. Well, let's go to the beginning, shall we? Get a little preview. Okay. This is my presentation. This is Junction, a Patchwork World. What you're seeing here is part of the cover art for Junction and the sequel Interchange. Junction is my first book. Interchange is my second, the sequel. I've also written the comic book First Knife with Simon Roy, and I've written some alternate history short stories that you can find in the Tales from Alternate Earths anthologies, as well as the novella Petrolia, and on Amazon you can find Groom of the Tyrannosaur Queen. So I've written a bunch of stuff, but Junction is my baby. It's my first book that was traditionally published, and I still have a soft spot for it. I thought that because there are a lot of people at this conference who are more educated than me about biology, it might be helpful if I talk about the storytelling aspect of speculative biology, and maybe there are some people out there who want to put their worlds into stories. Is there anyone who is trying to do that?
I am.
Yeah.
All right. So, if you leave the presentation now, you can take this home with you. The way that I do it, at least, is I narrow down world building into a personal story that readers will care about. So there's the whole world, but there also has to be a person. Whether or not that person is a human is up to you. But there has to be an individual who has some kind of problem. That is, I started with the world. I had this idea for the planet Junction, which is an exoplanet that 100 million years ago was either created or modified by some aliens. We don't know anything about them, but they took this planet that is a little bit larger than Earth. It's 1.3 gravities. It has no axial tilt, which is a bit strange. And every 15 kilometers or so, there's a wormhole. These wormholes lead to other planets, each of them with life on it. And almost all the time, it's the sort of life that can breathe oxygen. Over the past 100 million years, these wormholes have sort of bled their biota onto the surface of Junction. And biomes have spread on this part of the globe. There are a lot of mountains, and they tend to get contained in the valleys with strange border zones in between them. So that's the world. But then, what are people doing there? You can see that dotted line in the middle of the map there. That's the path of an airplane, which crashes, and the people on board have to hike back to other people to get rescued, and someone keeps murdering them. I'll talk about the murders in a minute, but I think you'll be interested in the aliens first. So these are some of the biomes that the characters pass through. There's the Earth biome, which is called Imsame by the native people there, and then there's the Worm Tree biome, and then you can see up in the upper right corner there. Then our heroes have to pass through the Glasslands biome, that's upper left corner. Then the Toymaker Forest, which is on the top of the mountains, before they reach what's on the lower right. That's the Sweet Blood biome, and across the valley from the Sweet Blood bugs is the Lighthouse biome, which is called that way because its trees reflect light from their star, which shines through the wormhole. And down at the bottom, oops, sorry about that. Down at the bottom, I don't know if you can see them, but there are some black creatures there. That's the Deathwind biome that runs down the middle of the valley, and it got that name for a reason. Then in the sequel, there are some other biomes, which I won't talk very much about. The Cavalier biome, the Dorado biome, the Howling Mountain, and the Sky Bow, also called the Orbital biome. If you go to the link, you can find a link to my language file that has the language of the native Noon people. That's where I got all of these names from. So I have a little tour through these biomes. Here's a tree worm from the Worm Tree biome. Here's some Glasslands creatures, a wheeler, a land urchin, and a shmoo. Here's a beautiful shmoo that was created by Franz Anthony, the natural artist from Indonesia, and I'm really happy with this shmoo. You can see how delightful he is. Here's the Toymaker biome, which the Toymakers are ring-shaped creatures that live inside hollow logs and build the logs into little mech suits for themselves made of wood. Sweet Blood biome, where I experimented with how to turn an exoskeleton into something that could support a larger animal. Here's a nicer picture of the Sweet Blood biome's apex predator called a Reaper, which turns out to not be the most dangerous thing there for our characters. Here's a Deathwind biome creature, whose body is made of ferrofluid. Here's some Lighthouse biome creatures that use fluid-filled sacs instead of muscles. And here's Earth. This is where the Earth wormhole comes out, and I chose it. It's up in the New Guinea Highlands, and I chose it because this is one of the few places on Earth that's plausible as a place where we might find a portal to another world that we don't already know about. But I didn't put it in Antarctica or at the bottom of the ocean, because putting it on the border between New Guinea and Indonesia creates political problems. And political problems give everyone in the book a reason to want to murder each other. So I borrowed something from the Orient Express there. The two main characters are Daisuke and Anne. Anne is a biologist. Daisuke is a Japanese nature show host, and he's the point of view character. And he is destroyed by the sense that he is a media personality with no substance to him. And so we go from the perils of the world, where they might freeze to death or starve, to the animals that might try to kill them, to the people who want to murder them, to Daisuke's own sense of inadequacy. It's possible that he'll live through this whole thing, but still be nothing inside. And that makes the reader care about him. Because even if you haven't been to an alien world, you still might have feelings of inadequacy. I'm going through this quickly because I know I have limited time. I won't tell you very much about the sequel, but in the sequel, the biology, the way that I constructed the book is the same, but the biology and the politics and the emotional stakes are all different. You can see some of the different animals here. These are cavaliers, and these are coatls, and these are some of the inhabitants of the orbital biome. Okay, and now I'll tell you what my next project is going to be. It's going to be called Fellow Tetrapod, and I'm planning to serialize it in September. You can see fellows like this, the monumental, and like this is a quotidian. They're intelligent, and they're not very friendly. You can keep up to date with that project, and if you want all my other projects at my Patreon or my Substack. And I don't think that we'll be able to do much of question and answering here in the time that I have, but join me on the Aliens channel where we can talk more. And that's all. Thank you very much.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. That
was a bit of a whirl. You got it.
Yeah, we're running a little bit over time, so we're gonna have no time for questions. Instead, we'll move on to the next slideshow, which is by me. I'm gonna be going over The Future is Wild, which, if you want to feel old, it's 20 years old now.
Oh, good lord.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind,
and the oldest person in this chat room.
Yeah. All right, so let's see if we can get the screen share going. Where is it? Where's the cursor? Oh hell! Oh, sorry. Okay, is it working now?
It's working.
It is.
Okay, excellent. So, The Future is Wild. It's 20 years old. Almost literally 20 years old, because the last episode, The Tentacle Forest, aired on June 25th, 2002. So this is going to be a hopefully relatively quick, I say relatively quick even though I chose a half-hour slot, retrospective of the series, its production, and its legacy. So first, let's start with the production and design of the series. So The Future is Wild is the brainchild of one Joanna Adams. She is an entrepreneur and TV documentary producer. She had previous experience with nature documentaries when she came up with the idea for The Future is Wild in about 1996. As a side note, Joanna is a trans woman, and a lot of earlier The Future is Wild media credits her using her dead name. This also means that The Future is Wild is officially trans culture. So why the future? Well, it's a unique concept. Jo wants something that would mix creativity with a solid scientific backing. She wants something that would inspire people to not only be creative, but also to think about their place in the history and, well, the future of the world that they live on. She wants something that would make education fun, to convey scientific concepts in a relatively interesting way. And she wants something that will be difficult for other networks to copy, because she noticed that whenever someone came out with a high-profile nature documentary, other networks would start putting out similar things, and so this would be a lot more difficult to do. This is the logo that they settled upon. I don't know why they chose this. It isn't very representative of the series, and to me, I always thought it looked like imagery from the 1998 Godzilla movie, but that's just me. So when Joe was shopping this around to people, someone mentioned, "Hey, that sounds a lot like this book After Man by this guy Dougal Dixon." So if you don't know Dougal Dixon, he is a geologist, author, and pioneer of the modern speculative evolution movement with his 3 books: After Man, The New Dinosaurs, and Man After Man. So one of the first things that Joe did was call Dougal Dixon and say, "Hey, I'm working on a speculative evolution project. Do you want in?" He said yes, and so he's been involved with The Future is Wild since pretty much the beginning. He He's actually the guy who did most of the creature design, and to this day, he's still involved with everything that the Future is Wild is doing. So that's pretty cool. Here he is with the model of a dude from his newer project, Green World. So in order to get that scientific backing that she desired, Joe brought on a bunch of scientific advisors, and I'm going to go over a bunch of them. Possibly the most important was R. McNeill Alexander, Professor Emeritus at University of Leeds, second insane Scottish man to join the project. He is an expert in biomechanics. He did lots of calculations to make sure that each of the creatures were plausible. If you want to know why the Mega Squid and Torreton are as big as they are, that's because this guy did calculations and he found that that was the maximum size that a terrestrial cephalopod or a tortoise, respectively, could theoretically be and still be able to support itself on land. Yes, they didn't just make that up. Other scientific consultants include Leticia Aviles, ecologist at University of British Columbia. She studies social behavior in spiders, so that's probably where the idea for the silver spiders came from. We have Phil Curry, paleontologist. He's the guy who came up with the Great Blue Windrunner, and apparently, even though the Great Blue Windrunner has 4 wings, a lot like the soon-to-be-described Microraptor, Phil Curry apparently had no knowledge of that and came up with the Windrunner independently. We have Richard Forty, invertebrate paleontology curator at the Natural History Museum. They also consulted him for a lot of specifics on the on the geology aspects. We have William Gilly, marine biologist at Stanford. Here he is fighting a Humboldt squid. He approved of the squibbing. So, just so you know, apparently, also when I was looking him up, I found that apparently you can call his lab and order an entire dead Humboldt squid, and he will ship it to your science class for you to do a dissection. So I thought that was kind of cool. Moving on, I know I'm going fast. We have Stephen Harris, professor at Bristol. Soon after The Future's Wild, he retired, and in his retirement, he testified to help get fox hunting banned in the UK, so that's pretty cool. We have Mike Lindley, whose day job is actually a wildlife documentary producer. If you go to his website, you can license all the footage that he's filmed over the years. In his side gig, he is a herpetologist, and that's where he was consulted for the series. We have Roy Livermore, geophysicist. Fun fact, he was the guy to first propose Novo Pangea, which, if you don't know, is one possible layout for the next supercontinent. It's the one where the Atlantic widens and the Pacific closes in opposition to other models like Pangea, Ultima, and Amasia. So, that's the supercontinent model that the Future's Wild rolled with. So, Joe called him and had him design all the plate tectonics for the next 200 million years, leading up to Novo Pangea. Moving on, we have Stephen Palumbi, marine ecologist at Hopkins Marine Laboratory, which is affiliated with Stanford. We have Jeremy Rayner, professor at University of Leeds, apparently a specialist on flight, but I couldn't find a whole lot of more information about him. And Bruce Tiffany, professor at UC Santa Barbara until relatively recently, paleobotanist, and apparently an insane wizard. There are also other scientific advisors which are credited on the website, but their individual contributions are more difficult to pinpoint. So I'm not going to go too in-depth about them. So the design of the Future's Wild came in 3 steps. First, the geography, which was designed by Roy Livermore and led up to the Novo Pangea model, in which, again, the Atlantic widens and the Pacific closes in, forming a supercontinent. Once the geography was ironed out, then paleoclimatologists were consulted to sort of lay out the global trends in climate going into the future, following trends in Earth's past regarding where the currents go, whether or not an ice cap forms, what the temperatures would be, etc. And from there, 3 times were chosen to focus on to show the maximum amount of variability in the climate. We have 5 million years in which is this cold, dry, ice age world. We have 100 million years, which is warm, swampy, comparable to like the late Jurassic. And 200 million years, which is dry, has this massive supercontinent. It's like the Permo-Triassic. And then, once they had the climate, they actually have a whole course of plant evolution outlined, but very little of that made it into the actual series, which is disappointing because there isn't a lot of focus on plants in projects like this. So once that was entirely ironed out, they knew the climate, they knew the forest, only then were the creatures designed. And the general process seems to have been is that someone had an idea, be it one of the consultants, Joe Adams, Dougal Dixon, the guy who brought him coffee, I don't know. But once someone had an idea, It was then sent to Dougal Dixon, who fleshed it out into a full creature with an ecological role and all that. Then the creature was ran by the consultants for plausibility to see if it was good, if it needed to be improved to be more biologically plausible, if the whole thing was impossible and needed to be scrapped, etc. And then after that, it was ran by the animators so that they could go, oh yeah, we can do this with the late 90s, early 2000s technology that we have. And if they couldn't do it, then it had to go back to Dougal Dixon to be redesigned to make it easier for them. There were a few constraints on the creature design. Firstly, they could not use any ideas from Afterman. This is because at the time, the film rights for Afterman had been optioned to DreamWorks, and if they did anything too close, they might get sued. For example, the one example which Dougal Dixon has brought up is the gannet whale, which was originally going to be a fully marine penguin like these guys from Afterman. But they brought it up, and the Futures Wild's lawyers, they read Afterman, and they said, the gannet whale is a little too close to the porpin right here, so please change it. So that's why the gannet whale is a gannet. Another constraint is that the Futures Wild had to be relatively low on mammals, because this was the early 2000s. Hair was really hard to animate. They didn't have the budget to make it look good. So that's one reason why mammals went extinct almost entirely by 100 million years. And thirdly, nothing had to be biologically impossible. No matter how implausible any of the creatures may seem, there were ideas that were shot down for being impossible. We have no idea what those were. You're going to have to imagine that for yourself. So the Futures Wild took about 5 million pounds, which is comparable to the budget of something like Walking with Dinosaurs, and it took 6 years to make. As with, for example, the Walking With series, production came in 2 parts, filming live-action backdrops and then putting creatures in them. They got a lot of mileage out of Argentine national parks, the Amazonian grasslands, the Bengal swamp, the European ice sheet. All that was filmed in Argentina. They also managed to get a lot out of southern England. They used an old quarry for the central desert. The flooded sea from 100 million years was also off the coast of England, and the Mediterranean Sea is Ingleborough National Park. They also came to America. They filmed the deserts of 5 and 200 million years in the deserts of New Mexico, and the tentacled forest from 200 million years was filmed in the redwood forests of Golden Gate National Recreation Area in California. I've been there. It's really cool. And then the CGI creatures were created by a team of 40 animators, which were stationed in an old church somewhere in the UK. Here's a little screenshot from the behind-the-scenes documentary. There is one. It's apparently only on the British and maybe Australian DVD releases of The Futures Wild. It's really hard to find. I haven't been able to find a full copy that wasn't partially corrupted. And so the Futures Wild aired in early 2002. It aired on the BBC in the UK, Animal Planet in the US, ZDF in Germany, Arte in France, ORF in Austria, and Mediaset in Italy. And there are 3 release formats. There's the 13-episode format, in which you have an introductory episode and then one for each of the ecosystems you focus on. There's a 3-episode format, in which you have separate episodes for 5 million years, 100 and 200 million years. And then you have the Animal Planet edit, which condensed everything down into an hour-and-a-half long special. The Animal Planet special made a few changes. It cut out a few settings. I didn't know that tropical Antarctica existed until long after I first found out about the Futures Wild. It was changed to be more friendly for a younger audience, and at the behest of Discovery Channel executives, instead of implied human extinction, the Animal Planet version says that we all moved into space and sent probes back to check on how life on Earth was doing all that time in the future. The Futures Wild has never actually given a solid, consistent answer on what happened to people. The book just sort of shrugs. It's like, well, maybe they went extinct. Maybe we moved to space. That's not what we care about here. The Animal Planet version decides, yep, we went to space. Dougal Dixon has hinted that we probably drove ourselves to extinction, a lot like in Afterman. We probably did it through over-harvesting resources, war, disease, etc. R. McNeil Alexander made a comment along the lines that modern medicine failed us, and that's why we went extinct. It's unclear whether or not he meant disease or something like telomere decay. So, I think we all know well all the glorious fauna of the Futures Wild. So I'm not going to go into them all in detail here. We don't have enough time, and there's already lots of commentary online about them. If you look, there is a pretty thorough breakdown of each of the creatures and how plausible they are. Somewhere along, I think it's on civatherium.narod.ru. So if you want to read that, go look that up. Instead, I'm going to go quickly over the Futures Wild expanded universe, all the tie-in media and stuff, which exists because Joe Adams is a very effective entrepreneur. So first, we have the books. The tie-in book was released alongside the series. It has a bit more detail than the series. It has higher resolution renderings. It's basically the basis for most of the other books, including The Wild World of the Future, which was aimed towards younger readers, and an updated ebook version which was released in 2014. The ebook version integrated clips and VR creature models. They try to integrate a lot of virtual and augmented reality stuff into these because the future is high technology. There were actually exhibits. From 2010 to 2011, there was a Futures Wild exhibit at the Sydney Aquarium. It was indoor. It seemed, from everything I've seen about it, it seemed to focus on aquatic animals and things that are descended from them, like fish, sharkopaths, mega squid, etc. It apparently had life-size models, augmented reality, and holograms. So that would have been pretty cool. In April 2012, a Futures Wild exhibit opened at, I'm sorry for butchering the German, Dino Park Munchhagen. It's one of those It's one of those parks with life-size statues of dinosaurs, and you walk around and you look at them. There was an area set aside for life-size models of the Futures Wild animals. Pretty much everything was represented there, which is pretty cool. It was originally at Munchhagen, but in 2016 they were moved to Dinosaurio Park Teufelschlucht, and apparently they're still there. So if you want to see life-size models of the Futures Wild creatures, go to Germany. I'll also note that they updated the designs a little bit, as you can see here with the gannet whale and the snow stalker. So some of the updated designs are pretty nice, I will admit. They had an entire educational curriculum set up for schools in the UK because Joe Adams wanted this to be because Joe Adams wanted this to also be educational, not purely for fun. So several primary schools actually had the Futures Wild themed lesson plans. They apparently also independently worked with schools in the US and UK according to their website. And also Singapore. So that's pretty cool. I'm jealous of these kids. There was an interactive CD-ROM intended for use in classrooms. Basically, the player is a biologist exploring the future, exploring each of the habitats, trying to get information on the creatures. It had clips from the series. It had biology trivia. It sounds pretty cool. I wish I played this. Apparently, you can buy it off of sites that sell supplies for educators, but they are very expensive. Of course, we have the animated series, co-produced by Nelvana, the largest animation studio in the entirety of Canada. 26 episodes, 22 minutes each, aired on Discovery Kids and Teletoon. This one, since it's a kids' TV series, it had to have a plot. So the plot was CG, this person right here in blue, is traveling through time to find a new suitable time for humanity to move to because they're being threatened by the return of the Ice Age. She picks up these 3 kids and a squibbin, and they travel through time and meet the various future creatures, which, for some reason, can all talk now. Yeah, I don't know why. For some reason, this series never really vibed with me, but I also didn't grow up with it, so that's just me. There is the manga by Takaaki Ogawa, who you may know as the guy who also did the manga for the New Dinosaurs, because Japan loves Dougal Dixon stuff, apparently. It was serialized from 2006 to 2007 and then published in a compilation volume. And if you can get your hands on this, it's great. Even if you can't read Japanese, the stories are very visual and easy to follow, and they're also just delightful. Takaaki Ogawa takes some liberties with the plots of each of these stories, and even invents a few new creatures that appear in the background, which I think is really cool as a way to sort of flesh out the world a little more. So if you can get your hands on a copy of one of the manga, it's great. I highly recommend it. There was a Futures Wild dark ride at Les Animaux du Futur. No relation to Demain Les Animaux du Futur, the book by Marc Bollet and Sebastian Steyer. This was at Futuroscope, which is a theme park in France themed around the future. It was kind of similar to a mix between the Haunted Mansion and the Carousel of Progress at Disneyland, where you went into this building. Yes, there was this entire pavilion for it. You got onto one of these seats, and it took you around this sort of center stage area with different quasi dioramas for several future environments. And you put on these little headsets to let me play this super quickly. You put on these little headsets that would show you augmented reality creatures. So you could even, according to word, you could even interact with them, which was that sounds pretty cool. It was open from April 5th, 2008 to September 30th, 2012, in which case it was shuttered. Unfortunately, it's been closed for basically 10 years. So unless you were in France for those 4 years, you are not going to see this. I'm sorry. Which especially sucks because at the gift shop at the end of the ride, they had... Oh, hell. They had the Poggle plush, which was an exclusive to the Futuroscope theme, to the Futuroscope ride. I would kill for one of these. Look at him! This is apparently the only official Futures Wild plush that has ever been released anywhere in the world. Gaze upon the glory. So now that you're done gazing, there was also a planetarium film. It's 20 minutes long. It's narrated by John Delancey. It shipped out with full dome planetariums. I know for a fact that it played at the Kingman Museum in Battle Creek, Michigan, and Schrader Planetarium in Redding, California. It probably also played elsewhere, but I couldn't find solid evidence for that. They rendered completely new footage for this, so I do want to go to one of these places to see it at some point because I'm a completionist. Unfortunately, it hasn't been ripped and uploaded online yet. So moving on, we have these little figures, which were sold in Japan and apparently also alongside the Futuroscope ride in France and the Sydney Aquarium exhibit, but I couldn't find independent confirmation of that. These little guys do pop up on eBay occasionally if you want them. There are 7 of them. They are small and adorable. And then we have the cancel projects. So in early 2009, Warner Brothers signed a deal with Joe Adams to produce a film version of The Futures Wild, and that was going great for a few months. It was eventually killed by Avatar. Avatar is also a speculative evolution movie. It's huge. It had a lot of effort. Wayne Barlow helped with the creature design, and once it was released, Warner Brothers felt that they couldn't actually make the Futures Wild movie without it feeling like an inferior and cheap ripoff of Avatar. That would look bad, so they ended up canceling it. There was also going to be a Futures Wild 2, a sequel series, which started development around 2004. Unfortunately, there was a change in management at the Discovery Channel, and they decided to stop producing documentaries and focus more on reality series, so they cut back on a bunch of documentaries, and the Futures Wild 2 was among these. They did have ideas, but luckily they're saving them for future projects. And now I'm going to quickly go over what these projects might be. So there are 2 things that have been announced so far. First, there might be a new TV series, which was announced in January 2016. It's being produced by Vanguard Films and Animation, which is founded by John H. Williams, one of the producers of Shrek, which sounds promising until you realize that Vanguard made such great movies as Valiant, Space Chimps, and Gnome Alone. According to the press release, this series is going to be maybe sci-fi action adventure, 26 episodes long. Nothing has been heard of this since then. But considering the rest of Vanguard's filmography, that might be a good thing in hindsight. Yeah. And then, of course, we have the infamous The Future is Wild VR, which is apparently still in development as of 2019. It's being produced by Studio CG artist. Joe Adams is still involved. Dougal Dixon is still involved. It's going to... whenever this comes out, it's going to be an exploration survival game from the point of view of you, who is a biologist in this cool ship, the Eon 2. It's planning on introducing new time periods, 20 and 50 million years, and thus new environments, new creatures, the whole works. It's going to recycle some of the scrapped concepts from that season 2. The Titan Dolphin. Yeah, the Titan Dolphin. It was one of them. It somehow got butchered into that for the tech demo. Be thankful that that's not going to be the finished product. This is literally just for the tech demo to make sure the VR tech was working. So, again, very little information has come out of this since 2019. Hopefully it's still in production. Hopefully it gets better than this. At least I hope that it will. So I recognize they went through that really fast. So for a few closing comments, what has the Futures Wild meant to me? Well, personally, I love it. It's the project that got me hooked on speculative evolution. I first watched the Animal Planet airing when I was around 4, and it hooked me, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. If you look back, I have drawings from early elementary school of the creatures from the Futures Wild. They're amazing. It's amazing, and I think a lot of other people were also hooked on speculative evolution through the Futures Wild. So it is directly the cause of why this conference exists. So I hold a lot of respect and nostalgia for it, and I hope that the future continues to be wild. So I recognize this is really fast, but thank you all for your time. I think we have time for like 1 or 2 comments.
We do indeed, and it's a break next, so if the comments go over into the break, that should be fine.
I have a funny little anecdotal story about my exposure to speculative biology in the Futures Wild. It's funny, as long as I can remember, I was always doing like little speculative creature designs, but of course I didn't know that speculative biology was a thing. I would just make fake extinct animals from like the past or future. And then at one point I was watching Animal Planet when I was like 4 or something, and I remember watching what must have been the Animal Planet version of the Futures Wild, like the abridged version. And I had no idea what it was. And because of the Flish segment and how it looked like the Permian, I convinced myself that there were actually flying fish in the Permian, and it was only much later that I learned that it was actually the Futures Wild.
Glorious.
So for you, the past had been wild.
Permian Flish.
It's the Permian Flish.
The Permian Flish.
That reminds me, didn't somebody on the DeviantArt make like an alternate timeline where a Flish take over land instead of like Tiktaalik?
I think so. I think I've heard of that somewhere before.
You might not be the first.
I'm a Permian Flish truther now. That's what happened.
Amen, brother.
We found Permian Flish in the stomach of the Permian bears.
So, does anyone have some Futures Wild themed questions?
When did that horrible Titan Dolphin beast get made? Like, I remember it floating around for a while. Is it just for the VR thing, or did it exist like as a concept before that?
So it did exist as a concept going back to the canceled sequel series, but the original concept was much more plausible. It was basically more like a crocodile, something that lived in shallow swamplands and just sort of ambush attacked prey. Somehow, during the production of the VR game, that got warped into the monstrosity that we all know and hate.
They made him
We
taller.
should not talk about the evil.
Yeah, they apparently that is not going to be the actual finished design. So good.
Oh. Good.
Thank God.
Let me see if I can find
One question I had was, with this like canceled series, was it going to be like a different timeline than the original series, or would it be like within that same timeline?
We don't know. It's completely unknown whether or not it would have like been a different timeline, whether it would have gone further into the future, whether it would have stopped at different time periods, in different environments in the same time. We just don't know.
I see.
All right. So, any other questions? Well, if not, then unfortunately I have to leave. I have to leave early, so I'm going to be cutting out. Or I'm going to be cutting out around now. Heath, if you're still here and still recording, then that's great.
Both Heath and Zach, I think, are recording at the minute. So,
okay, awesome, cool. So I'm going to drop out and have fun with the rest of the Specposium.
Right, so it's about time for the next presentation. There has been some technical difficulties with this next presentation, but we're solving it in the good old-fashioned way, where I share my screen and just go on to the next slide as and when is needed. So I hope we're all ready for a fruit-themed presentation next.
Fruit!
Just check everybody's muted.
Okay, I'm ready.
I will be ready in half a second. Right, are we all...
You are visible, Charlotte.
Yep, we can see it.
Alrighty, thank you, Charlotte, so much for being my proxy presenter right now. And thank you everyone so much for tuning in. I'm Tala Davis. Some of you might have seen me on Discord as Akimi Tarasu, and I'm excited to present on this little head world I've been developing for the past couple years. Welcome everyone to Luxuriosum, the planet of living fruit. Next slide. First, before I get into the nitty-gritty biology, I want to give a tiny bit of background on the project and how it started. Basically, one day in December 2019, I happened to have an odd thought. What if fruit, but people? Charlotte, click. This led to obvious questions like what sort of cultures would these fruit people have? And and more importantly, how did this ever come to be? What sort of circumstances would lead to the evolution of such a race? And Charlotte, you can keep clicking. Ideas were slow at first, but the questions kept coming, and so did potential answers, and eventually things snowballed into what it is today, and is continuing to grow daily. Next slide. So with that said, let's start big and work our way down. Luxuriosum orbits a K-type main sequence star at about 0.6 AU. The nature of its star means that it experiences less UV radiation than Earth, which is beneficial for its inhabitants, but the most important thing to mention about Lux is that it actually is part of a binary planet system with another celestial body called Altum. There's supposed to be a GIF going right now, but it's fine. The two planets' orbits are modulated by the existence of a smaller moon in addition to evection resonance. Both planets are also expanding their orbits and gradually moving away from the Sun and each other. In terms of size, Lux is about 0.8 Earth masses and Altum is 0.6. The binary system was initially formed due to a kissing collision about 5 billion years ago between two protoplanets, eventually becoming the two we see today, and remnant dust collapsed into the distant moon, and both planets are approximately 500 million years older than the Earth. Next slide. Altum is a story all its own, one whose first notions actually predate Luxuriosum and its living fruit. It's an ocean world brimming with life and experiences drastic water level changes across the planet's surface because of its interactions with Luxuriosum, giving the ocean world its most distinctive feature, being seasonal seas. Essentially, Altum's orbit with the larger world results in drastic tidal changes. The planet's periapsis, known as heated, results in water pulling to far ends of the planet while they are at their closest. Bare areas without water form a dry band around the planet along its meridian. Altum also has its own unique ecosystems and life forms adapted to such environments, but they'll have to be discussed another time, as it's Altum's sister planet's time to shine. Next slide. Popping back over to Luxuriosum, Lux lacks the oceans seen on Altum. There were oceans once, but they haven't existed for a long time. Most of the water on the planet is either in the atmosphere or trapped in ice at the poles. The presence of so many plants has also reduced standing water on the planet's surface, like how wetlands help control water levels. This occurs on a near global level because of the sheer plant biomass. Because of its internal composition and the gravitational forces due to its constant interaction with Altum, Lux is highly volcanically active and has had multiple periods of intense volcanism throughout its history. This high volcanic and tectonic activity has also caused the formation of many precious metals and gemstones. So this planet is rich in precious minerals. Rich volcanic soils are also common and are a lucrative resource for the planet's inhabitants. The volcanic activity has also allowed for great preservation of fossils and ancient ecosystems, buried and packed beneath layers of ash. Ancient forests, creatures, all sorts of organisms preserved perfectly in the rocks. A wide variety of life forms can be found on the planet, including sessile heterotrophs, essentially fungus, and a huge amount of plant species. The planet has seen several major extinction events owed to periods of high volcanism, but currently is experiencing a peak in biodiversity. The dominant life form is a division of plants known as vivusophytes, the aforementioned living fruits, which are a branch of the larger radixophyte plant clade. Next slide. Vivusophytes exhibit alternating generations of a sort, just in a way different than earth plants. Instead of alternating between sporophyte gametophyte generations, the alternation is between sporophyte vivusophyte generations, which is where the division draws its name. Flor is the term for the plant stage, while carps are used for the fruits. They are also referred to as the floral and faunal forms of a species, and I generally like to refer to vivusophytes as plantimals. Targeted seeding is something that is very beneficial to vivusophytes. Carps can almost guarantee their seeds an environment that they will thrive in. Ample sunlight, the right amount of moisture, humidity, good soil pH, instead of relying on haphazard landing location. This is incredibly beneficial to sessile plants, who have to remain in one spot for their entire lives. Bodies also grant a boost to survival in just about any environment. They provide nutrients that the animal picked up throughout its life to the next generation, including some rare and essential nutrients. And both of these prior factors increase the chance for a seedling to survive exponentially in the establishment phase, between germination and recruitment, which is arguably the most important stage in a young plant's life. Their chances of recruitment increase dramatically because of favorable conditions and additional resources provided by the carps. Next slide. There are three main life stages of carps once they come off the vine. One is development, which involves completing maturity. 2 is waiting, where fruits are fully developed but not yet deteriorating. And 3 is apotheosis, the decaying stage, which is very rapid and it results in death. When a creature dies, the nitrogen and other resources inside the body aren't immediately accessible to seeds. They need to be broken down first, often by microbial and chemical means. Once the dying process occurs, the fruit starts to experience inhibited mobility and motor function as toxins spread through the body. The dying body produces acids and a compound similar to tannins once a good spot is discovered, and seedlings retain these compounds for protection from predation while they are very young. As the bodies decompose, they also produce an herbicide that beats out competing plants to help clear the space for seeds. Getting a proper death also allows for the conversion of living tissue to better fertilizer. If the death is sudden, this process does not occur because of the stop of metabolic processes. Finding an ideal spot for seeds is an incredibly rewarding experience for a fruit, and it makes the plantimal not want to leave. Dying in such a spot under optimal conditions feels good. It's a warm and peaceful feeling, and the creature just drifts off, essentially forever in bliss. Next slide. I have taken the liberty to highlight a few important parts of carp anatomy, using an Apel specimen for reference. This is also supposed to be animated, but it's fine. Green matter refers to what plant neurological tissue is. Turgorans help form the basis for plant-based nervous systems on Lux, but many viviso species have found newer, faster pathways more akin to earth animals. Glands like the pineal gland have photoreceptors in them, making them crucially important for regulating apotheosis and behavior. The pineal gland in particular is responsible for melatonin release, which is incredibly apt for the peaceful, sleepy feeling that plantimals feel when apotheosis initiates. Carps have many ways of sensing light, including directly through the skull, true and parietal eyes, as well as what's called cerebellum tissue. A lot of their body is dedicated to digestion and breaking down every little thing possible for nutrients. They do have a distinct quirk, however. Plantimals have no traditional waste elimination system. It's a one-way tract with no other end. They're meant to have short lives where they take in as much as they can, not lose any of the fertilizer for their seeds. However, there are detriments to not having that ability to remove toxins, so they have methods to deal with it. The most common strategy is to have an organ that breaks down toxins as much as possible, kind of like kidneys or livers, but actively destroys them instead of filtering them out. A great deal of plantimals primarily lose toxins through sweat, and in extreme circumstances, they vomit up toxins, typically through their secondary mouth, which is known as a vent. Second mouths, kept from ancestral times, are used to expel rotten food. Instead of sending things all the way back out, they just eject from the second point. These second mouths are really the only out hole of the body and are used in cases of emergencies. Some of the most social plantimals have the ability to generate event milk for younger members, kind of like crop milk. It's high in fat and proteins, as well as some microbiota and other supplements. And because plantimals don't have a through digestive system, they often possess complex, chambered innards that exchange materials as necessary. These systems vary depending on a plantimal's niche and diet, but on the whole, they can digest and incorporate over 99% of what they eat. And what they don't gets stored in their hindgut as extra fertilizer. Nothing can be expelled once it's reached the hindgut, but it's been so thoroughly vetted and digested that it's basically just soil. This organ can get full, but it rarely ever does. Locular cavities house seeds. Locules are filled with gelatinous mass to keep seeds cushioned and moisturized. Seeds are attached to placental tissue that connects them to the plantimal, which allows them to grow and also keeps them in place. Locular cavities are often in the center of the body and shielded by regions of bone and other organs, much like hearts, as they are the most valuable part of the plantimal. Next slide. But perhaps the most interesting feature of plantimal biology is their merged circulatory skeletal system known as the heartwood system. The Vivusophytes initially developed a merged xylem-phloem for efficiency's sake. Instead of two systems going to the same place, they just have their water and sugar in the same place. So their circulatory system has been neatly interwoven with their bones, which are rather hollow and porous tissue, and their blood flows right through it. At the interior lies the highly lignified old xylem, the dead heartwood or the true bones, that passively move blood away from the heart. Interior heartwood is thin initially and grows in circumference with age as the creature grows. The middle ring, between the outside and inside, is a transitional layer that flows neither up nor down. This layer is known as transitional xylem, and it is structurally very important. It contains a sort of marrow and helps produce pitch, and to the exterior is the actively pumping sapwood, the living and growing part of the system that actively moves blood back towards the heart. There's typically passive transport through the inner tissue and active through the outside, but pressure created from the heart pumping keeps blood moving throughout. Their blood, in fact, is full of water, sugar, defensive chemicals, and leghemoglobin, or Leg-H, which is an oxygen-carrying substance found in legumes, like soy, that aid in nitrogen fixation and possess heme, just like real earth animals' globins. This system does unfortunately create some problems, namely that broken bones can cause internal bleeding. Plantimals have some safeguards that help mitigate damage and heal in case something like that happens, like transitional xylem, but it's still pretty crippling. Unless repaired quickly, this can easily result in permanent loss of function for a limb if the tissue dies because of lack of blood. But small creatures with fragile bones don't really live that long anyway, so it's not that big of an issue. Next slide. Jumping back out a little bit, let's examine the history of life on Lux. The planet is thought to have had life at least 500 million years longer than Earth. True animals have existed for a long time, and were vastly more prevalent 1 billion years ago than in the modern day. There even existed truly mobile plant species known as ambulophytes, both of which historically dominated Luxuriosum's surface. But there has been a perceived pattern of high volcanic activity every couple billion years, the first of these being spurred by the initial collision creating the planets themselves. Volcanic eras, or VEs, are owed to the circulations of certain highly volatile components of the world's mantle, causing periodic superplumes in synchrony with the intense gravitational forces by Altum, resulting in periodic massive global eruptions. High volcanism on a small planet can spell disaster for life, which it has multiple times. Life was in a proxy Cretaceous period for the planet when the last volcanic era occurred and caused a cataclysmic extinction event. And Charlotte, if you could click twice. This period of time is known as the Tertiary Volcanic Era, or TVE. This geologic era occurred approximately 500 million years ago, and it caused an extinction event resulting in the loss of about 99% of life on the planet. Extinctions during the TVE include 99.9% of animal genera, 100% of ambulophyta plants, 80% of radixophyta plants, a handful of vivusophytes, and a few funguses that were also pretty minimally impacted. Next slide. During the TVE, series of global volcanism routinely leveled animal populations and gave the plantimals their chance to radiate from a few species to thousands. Ultimately, the plantimal lineage survived so much better than any other throughout this catastrophic era because of their reliance on death for survival. Really, nothing else in life is certain. Access to a mate? That's not certain. Access to food? Not certain. But death? That's certain. When the planet was cloaked in death, the species most attuned to it survived. Many animals also likely suffered from Marie's disease, causing bone spurs after exposure to ash. Ash could cause abrasions to their teeth and gastrointestinal blockages. Young animals grew up with dental fluorosis, damaging weak enamel and deteriorating their health. These hardships resulted in dramatically lowered quality of life, and survival was not as big a deal for plantimals because they lived to die, not lived to live. Oceans were also not exempt from the VE's catastrophes. Marine life suffered from a bunch of hypoxic anoxic areas, acidification, eutrophication, and rapidly changing temperatures in the water, which killed basically all marine life. Not even the sharks made it. That should tell you how bad things got. All taxonomic groups of amblyophytes or mobile plants perished. They were generally more evolved for outbreeding than inbreeding and suffered some severe bottlenecks and inbreeding depressions. And virtually all amblyophytes were what is known as self-incompatible. And when their genetic diversity got so low that they couldn't recognize other individuals as different from themselves, they effectively became extinct because they could no longer breed. As an understory species, the original origin shrub ancestors were already shade tolerant and adapted to be able to survive better in low light conditions, which were fairly prevalent when ash cloaked the skies. There was decreased ability for plants to photosynthesize because of the ash clouds, and plants able to generate energy by gaining nutrients from heterotrophic plantimals scavenging around were benefited more than other plants trying to survive at the same time. The high acidity of volcanic soils helped break down plantimal bodies and make them more accessible for uptake. This was detrimental to most true plants because their seed coats would deteriorate and their embryos be harmed. Volcanoes also dumped phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon into the soil, which was good for fast growers, like the origin shrub. Vivissos were benefited in that they could also somewhat moderate how much nutrients to use at a given time because of their bodies. So they really had a big leg up during this time over other types of life. Next slide. Drivers of plantimal evolution are quite different than for Earth animals, which are primarily survive and reproduce. For plantimals, the main purpose is to die, but apart from death itself, you want a good death. They want to attain favorable conditions for their seeds, to find the best plot of soil and be able to compete to keep it. They need to disperse far from their parent plant and give their seeds good nutrients. You can see this in adaptations. Some specialize for different soils and environments. Some become physically great competitors, others rely on cooperation, intelligence, and sociality to succeed. And there are many more strategies exploiting virtually every niche on the planet. Plantimals only need to survive long enough to attain that goal of finding the best plot of soil, so their performance peaks quickly and they generally have short lives with a few notable exceptions. Another big objective is don't be eaten. Carnivores stock up on optimally packaged nutrients and metabolites to benefit their own seeds, which takes away success from their prey. Therefore, there are quite a few adaptations to deter depredation, and ones that favor developing predation strategies as a shortcut to success. Other evolutionarily favored traits include those that benefit other closely related members of their species. There are also those that take advantage of shortcuts, like parasites. Pictured here is a going phylogenetic tree for vivissophytes. I still have a lot of one-off species that I'm working on incorporating, so there are more orders and families to come. But now we can take a look at some individual species in detail. Next slide. Vagaprales are an ancient line of vivissophytes with a very unique and innovative strategy of survival. External seeds. This is quite an innovation along plantimal lines, and it's quite successful. Although they lack some of the benefits of internally developed seeds, they also have other benefits, like the ability of one animal to produce multiple generations of seeds. There are also 3 major extant suborders: Abelissoprales, Cicaprales, and Vitiprales. These are the only extant branches of the Exopsidiclade, which are creatures with seeds in their epiderm. The Abelissoprales, or pine hogs, are small creatures that rely on tough defenses to get by. Like all other vagaprales, the pine hogs spread their seeds through shedding. There are dozens of species in this group, some of which look very similar to each other, but you can tell the difference in a couple of small species based on the fringe of their scales, how toothy or straight they are. Cicaprales have 3 major families: the Scutamaceae, Spiciaceae, and Parvigaceae. Members of Scutamaceae have developed large tails full of seeds that can be used for protection. If attacked, the loose seeds come off in the predator's jaw and the animal can escape. Another defense strategy can be seen in Spiciaceae, a family that's able to purposefully project their seeds instead of having them gradually fall off. They can do this when in danger to deter potential predators, with the added benefit of seeds getting stuck and carried away, and they might be well off if the attacker dies soon after. Among the most common and highly representative clade of Vagaprales are the Parvigaceae, or the strawberry echidnas. Most of the Vagaprales are pinecone-like and have armor that makes them not terribly agile, but members of this family are some of the most agile with wide ranges. Larger varieties have the ability to keep producing seeds throughout their life. Smaller ones often don't. Eventually, when they run out of seeds, they live out the rest of their lives like a normal animal and die in a perfectly haphazard location. And lastly, Vitiprales have taken plantimals' capabilities to develop seeds really far, and has mother plantimals, which adds another stage to the life cycle, that grow mini plantimals that actually contain the seeds, that pop off the mother and then go run and go die. They're kind of like cute tumors that have little arms and legs and remove themselves. They often don't even have mouths because they've parasitically gotten all the nutrients they need from the mother. This strategy takes a huge energy burden off the plant, only needing to produce the mothers. The mother, if she survives, can produce babies for a long time, and the parent plant just can focus on making the mothers, each producing hopefully dozens of babies in their lifetime. Next slide. Fire is an important ecological factor for many ecosystems on Lux. Fire can increase turnover for species, creating space for the next generation. Post-fire ecosystems are a quite competition-rich environment, and immediate post-fire adapted species are known as ash eaters. And I will go over 2 with a very interesting relationship dynamic. The first of these I call fire gremlins. Their parent plant is a shrub that has thick bark and lignotubers and can easily survive low-intensity fires. The animals are closed by resin in seeds that melt, and the fire gremlins are released through serotiny. Some of them stay close to their parent plants to help protect them, while others go to tend to sprouts and rip up competitors. Fire gremlins rip up the fast-growing seedlings of other plants that grow quicker than their own alternate generation. And the primary targets of the fire gremlins are fast-growing and resourceful annuals, much akin to cheatgrass. However, they have a great and powerful defender of their floors, who will do its best against the gremlins when they attack. Defenders fresh off the plant are little, and most die small, but the few that undergo metamorphosis can reach very large sizes, akin to an earth borer. The many young fruits eat and grow and eventually burrow into the ground and to wait until a fire comes, to either die and try to grow a new generation, or, if they time it right, to reach a defender state. Then, post-fire, through chemical and heat signaling, survivors metamorphosize into a larger, more aggressive form, and come out of the ground to defend their plants from being ripped up by competitors. That same signaling also spurs germination of seeds, and seedlings often grow while the animal is still alive, as the grass is not very burdening to their large bodies and they don't live very long anyway. Defenders are incredibly prolific. Their floors generating tons of fruit before they die and vegetatively sprouting in their short lifespans. Only a couple plants need to establish for them to completely dominate the floor of a forest, and after enough time they can turn it into a grassland. Their ideal regime of just a couple years between fires gives them enough time to peak and die and get a regenerative burn. Therefore, fresh turnover is great for it, and its very presence encourages fire frequency by providing fuel via dried grasses. And dry defender plains are filled with other fire-adapted species as they burn frequently. Next slide. Typically, the fire gremlins are found in forests and forest edges and are even considered forest protectors because they keep fire intensity relatively low, protecting against defender incursion. Where there are defenders prevalent, trees get burned more regularly, and they take over and produce fire-heavy grasslands, where a lot of species have to be fire-adapted to survive. And fire gremlins have stopped their fiery march into forests for thousands of years. Next slide. Moon trees are one of the most remarkable species on Lux, even though they aren't vivissiphites. Also known as autumn trees, they are one of the oldest species on Lux. They're so tall that their leaves brush the upper atmosphere of the planet, and their seeds are hardened and tough to survive the Great Fall, even able to survive the fires of atmospheric reentry. Moon trees are excellent growers. They are the masters of getting big and staying big, and baby moon trees grow so fast you can actually watch them grow before your very eyes. The canopy composition of moon trees varies a lot, different layers being adapted for different things. Lower branches with minimal access to sunlight often die and are repurposed to water collection. The next layers are the really lush portions of the canopy, big leaves that get smaller close to the top and much more akin to needles and eventually stop completely at a point where living tissue begins to freeze. These lush canopies are home to distinct ecosystems with life forms completely cut off from the ground, and often evolve into completely unique species endemic to a single tree. The spire only develops well into a tree's age when a tree is mature and capable of growing such a feat. It grows from the crown straight up tens of thousands of feet. The tree's thick bark protects the internal living layers from the cold, and at the apex is called the apical cap. The apical cap protects the meristem from the elements as the tree gets higher, surviving temperatures of sometimes negative 100 degrees Celsius. There is a peak temperature back to an average of 0 in the beginning of the mesosphere, right around the stratopause. This is where the apical cap opens and seed production occurs. You just do one tap. The moon tree's rubbery branches grow in a way as to create complex launch mechanisms, and tension increases over time with desiccation. Thus, they're able to store kinetic energy in two ways at the same time. This allows the seeds to be flung at high speeds in a manner perfected over millions of years of evolution. And then you can tap again. Seed launch is kind of like a pistol shrimp snap, so violent and powerful it can go 100 kilometers an hour. Moon tree seeds were initially timed to coincide with heated because of low gravity circumstances that allowed their seeds to travel farther. The seeds are launched in such a way that they can quickly pick up speed and maintain an orbit for a decent length of time, reaching speeds of many thousands of miles per hour. At this point in flight is when seeds are at risk of leaving the atmosphere and going to autumn. They in fact get their names because at some points in history their launched seeds were yanked away by gravity to the moon instead when autumn made its very close passes. Next slide. As previously mentioned, over 99% of animal species were wiped out in the TVE, or true animal species, but a few species still exist. Most are small, adaptable, omnivorous, mammal-like endotherms that survived a lot of initial explosions of the volcanic era, even temporarily filling other niches. Some of the other animal survivors included heavily shielded wingless invertebrates as well, but surviving animals were driven to caves and polar ecosystems where vivisciphites can't thrive and they wouldn't have to compete with the indomitable fruits. Next slide. Pictured here is a large omnivorous species of Luxurian rat that eats anything it can get its paws on. Some features of this species include its disc-shaped furry face that directs sounds to its ears, as well as its large eyes and ears for detecting food. They also have an especially good sense of smell. They have webbed toes and prehensile fingers to help traverse their cave environments, and they give birth to live young. Next slide. This one's going to be complicated. The species featured in this presentation are only a selected handful among literally dozens of distinct and remarkable species, which I would love to cover more later. One of which includes these explodey boys, who function as a living weapon that can detonate if they feel threatened. Go ahead and tap twice. And then Luxurian hippos, a social aquatic species that grows full trees on their back while still alive. Tap twice again. Cantables, which are relatives of the defenders that are apex predators and grow to immense sizes. Tap again. Wasp fungus, which poisons and takes over their prey and kills them. Tap again. Berry flies, the specialized pollinators of the world. Again. Corals, which are a keystone species in most environments that have unique relationships with symbionts that only they get to feed on. And one more time. And then solivales with their distinctive photosensitive tissue, among many, many, many others. Next slide. The final species I'll discuss in detail today are the dominant sapient species of the world. The people are also an entire presentation's worth of material on their own, but I'll go over some highlights. Luxurians are a member of the apoclade of primate-like dehiscent fruits. As a sentient race, they are especially keyed into terraforming and are very space-oriented, tantalized by the other planet being so close. The only thing holding them back in terms of scientific advances is a cultural and philosophical war between progressive and fundamental ideologies. The traditional conservative mindset is that a person's duty is to their seeds. They view things like science and art and other pursuits to be frivolities and ultimately a useless waste of time. Whereas vivants, or life lovers, believe that they should strive to be more than their base biological goals as a species, and that enjoying life is not a sin. Plot determination is a huge focus of these societies, as it's the end goal of everyone's life. Most systems are either meritocratic, where plots of land are given to individuals based on societal contribution, or capitalistic, or equalistic, which relies on widespread terraforming to provide equal space and quality to all individuals.
Have to
Increased life.
sadly interrupt you here because the time is up now.
Oh god, okay, I'll finish up real quick. It's just like a couple more slides. Okay.
All right, speed through the next few slides, and there will be a break later where you'll be able to explain yourself and have questions and answers.
Yeah, okay. So dual trees, important culturally. You can skip ahead. Hopefully get a book one day. Skip ahead. This is my contact information. One more slide. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for the presentation. Absolutely fascinating. I hope you'll be able to get through some questions and stuff in the break.
Okay, cool.
All right, next presentation is up.
Alouatta, gentil Alouatta.
You ready to present?
It appears that they're currently muted.
Oh, damn. Hang on. So I've lost a thing. Yes. Sorry for muting you. I think there was some noise earlier. I do mute people just if there's any sort of noise. Right,
Hello,
you're unmuted now. Are you able to present?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you,
Hello.
You're
Okay.
at an audible volume, sir.
Thank you. Okay, let's start. Is it showing?
Still loading for us?
Okay, is it showing?
I see visible spectra.
Okay. So, as you know, with like the recent popularity of seed worlds, popularized by Schwefel and his Serena project. Alouatta is a monkey seed world made by humans in the late 2020s by a rogue organization known as SEED. SEED is the Society of Ecosystem Eradication Desist and has been protesting against the world government for a certain amount of time.
Oh, I'm going to interrupt you there. Some of us are only seeing 2 white rectangles. We aren't seeing the presentation.
Well, that's unfortunate. How
Are
do
you
I?
sharing the application or your entire screen? Because sometimes if you're not sharing the entire
No,
screen, when you full screen a PowerPoint,
okay. Wait, I'm gonna fix it. Is it still 2 rectangles?
Yep, still just rectangles.
I have no idea how this works.
Are you sharing your entire screen?
Oh, okay. Okay, that should be working.
Yes, that's working now.
Victory!
Right.
Okay, so a lot of seed worlds generally don't have like a backstory to them, and I think that's absolutely fine. But Alouatta's backstory is like a bit aimed with real world realism in mind. to try to explain at least how the project came to be. The Sea Society has been like protesting against the world government for a certain amount of time because of a certain bill called Atlas, which is the authorized transmutive legal use of species, which globalizes animal experimental use because of a former World War event. This enraged Seed into extreme, quite extreme global actions, not unlike modern day PETA, which you can imagine is actually quite extreme to an extent. Seed isn't just purely primate focused, but the branch model, which is the Myriadonalis organization of non-human primate observation, which pioneered the project, is. Despite having quite extremist actions, Seed at its core is actually quite good-natured, and its bad actions aren't quite intentional, which may or may not include antimatter bombings. Okay, so this is a picture of like the spaceships leaving Earth in what is the modern day Colombia. A lot of them were shot down actually. This includes like rival SeaWorld factions, which aim to seed other SeaWorld projects. A lot of like the local organisms of Alouatta itself were killed by missiles, which has led to an imperfect biosphere. A lot of organisms include like fungi, fish, and a lot of the newer monkey species. Hybridization for the new Howler genome was actually used because it was semi-damaged during the transportation process. This a lone planet was chosen at the edge of the galaxy, which is named ATEM UA++A. It took around like 5,000 years to arrive using antimatter technology, which was quite popular at the time. The diameter of Alouatta is actually around 11,979 kilometers, and it's actually not as big as normal Earth. So, and since its age, it's actually not as warm. So, artificial terraforming had to take place for it to be somewhat habitable. As you can see here, multiple robots produced by factories were actually used in terraforming the planet, and some are actually still in use today as in spy cameras, which monitor the modern species in the timeline, as you can see here. Mining and oil extraction was also used to produce a lot of the materials needed for these robots. As you can see here, the robots planting like plants for the future of the seeding project. Giant mirrors will launch up to space via space rockets to create global warming artificially, warm up the planet, to increase the oxygen levels. This process lasted for a few hundred years, and after it was done, the invertebrates were released, and shortly after, the vertebrates, which together created a coherent ecosystem, which evolved over the course of millions of years. Okay, this is the seeded creatures list, or rather, like the remnants of it, which includes howler monkeys, butterflies, scorpions, isopods, krill, crayfish, lobsters, filero, nautiluses, sea butterflies, jellyfish, anemones, worms, along with some plants such as pineapples, banana, potatoes, and plants, and algae and slime mold. Slime mold was actually somewhat externally genetically engineered because of the lack of fungi. As such, they largely take the roles. A lot of the missing organisms fail. A lot of the rest of the organisms were also modified, but after they were seeded, the general tampering has stopped, and they were left to their own devices. Okay, so this is a general phylogeny chart. So we can here see like the ancestral monkey, which split off into like many clades. There's an early clade which became terrestrial, and there's both herbivorous and carnivorous representatives over here on the right, and there are some secondary aquatic members as well. Here's a fossorial clade which actually shares ancestry with an aquatic one, which a lot of these general relations have been shaped by early Alouatta because of general mismanagement, like a lot of famine and forest fires, that kind of stuff, that generally like push a lot of pressures for like the future of the monkeys, as you can see here with this general double clade thing. A lot of arboreal ones are there too, which eventually you see led to flying ones over here. And there's also random branches which really don't have any living descendants. Over here, which is a fairly interesting part, which is the bipedal ones. The bipedal ones were actually like had a stage where they had to be forced to be bipedal, you could say. They were shot basically as part of the forest fire thing. They were forced to the desert, which pressures made them be more viable to be bipedal. And later this trait was fairly like useful, and they kept it. And then they were also on a separate continent of themselves, so they got to radiate a lot. As you can see, there's also like secondarily quadrupedal members, which have gained some unique adaptations from like being bipedal for a bit. There's also like carnivorous ones, which eventually become sapient, but we're going to touch on that a bit later. So here are some more basal monkey species, which are like from the earlier stages, I would say. This one here is from 1 or 2 million years after like the initial seeding. It's very primitive. And over here is the previously mentioned the bipedal member, which is in the desert, which is being generally forced out there. Here are some more derived ones, which includes this bipedal one, which is actually a descendant of the previously mentioned bipedal one. They can get fairly derived to an extent. This one is about 13 million years old. Is it? No, it's 45. Yeah, it's 45 million years old, derived from the ancestor. They are they're very generally very an erect body plan to browse in the trees. And over here are some of the previously mentioned flying monkeys, which are derived from arboreal ancestors, but have since spread out over the globe and into very different niches. And here's a carnivorous saber-toothed one, which is somewhat similar to an apex predator, and it goes around hunting and stuff. And here's a more weird fossorial one, which is a burrower and goes to hunt for neotenic caterpillars, which are quite serpentine-like. The invertebrate diversity in Alouatta is actually quite astonishing, since there's no fish. As such, the howler monkey is really the only vertebrate around here. Here on the left, you can see some scorpions. The rife chanter is a mantis-like thing, which will grasp and catch prey, and the glisskimmer is a sort of water skimmer which scours the water surface for prey. And here are phylliroes. If you don't know what a phyllyro is, it's basically a pelagic mollusk, duty branch, which has convergently evolved a body plan similar to fish, in which I chose to also use for this project. Here's some environmental stuff, in which you can see the general aesthetic of Alouatta. Here's a river crossing with a herd of rankies being chased by some predators, and you can see there's a lot of like fauna in the background. These two pictures are both around 30 million years in, and the ecosystem has largely recovered, so it's very diverse. On the right here is a colder, snowy environment. Despite Alouatta being like a cold planet, there's still like a lot of warm places. But the map, which I will send later, is quite cold. Here's two more recent pictures from 45 million years, in which more aquatic monkey has been beached and scavenged by more predatory one, and flying and other small ones are trying to steal its food. And an important bit on the right picture, this is of a predator, the bipedal one stalking the herbivorous one, is actually the ring in the background. Around this time period, Alouatta from a moon collision actually possessed a ring for a few million years, which has impacted local wildlife for a bit. I'll touch on the sulfons briefly. The sulfons were quite recent in development, and I've used quite a lot of world building stuff for them. To grossly simplify, they're Neanderthal-ish wild ape-like beings, which are still quadrupedal and use a variety of tools. Despite living on a tiny section of the globe, just on this single continent here, they have like a very diverse culture according to the environment. There's plains one, there's a coastal one, there's foresty ones, and domestication has happened, but general infighting is very common, and a lot of weapons here on the left they've invented due to being howler monkeys. Using blow dart technology has been quite beneficial for them, and they can shoot quite lethal blow dart things. And there's even a cannon here which uses air technology. Alouatta is quite, even though it's being developed for around 2 years, is actually still unfinished. And here are some future sketches for you to see. So these are some, on the left here, some post-extinction monkeys, which are which look quite derived and are like hundreds of million years in the future. And on the right here's on board the live terrestrial phyleros, which are the fish-like things mentioned earlier. There's a serpentine one, and yeah, I have a lot of plans for them. They're they are three-legged, and their front foot is actually the foot of a phylero. The foot, as in like the equivalent of a mollusk, if you will, if you know what that is. And the two limbs are derived from gill arches. Okay, and I believe that's about time.
It's time exactly. So that was a very good presentation. We are now in the break, which means it's a good time for
Okay.
quick questions and answers. Because I
What?
think people really like the run keys. So
Oh,
if anyone
fascinating.
does
Do I
anyone
just
have
answer
some
it in
questions?
here?
You can answer it in there, or you can, if people want to hop on voice and ask you in
Okay, I'm
person.
gonna. Okay. I'm gonna answer the
just
questions until time is up.
okie dokes. Does anyone want to ask some questions?
Well, I gotta ask everybody, what's the favorite creature you've made?
Fair question actually. Can it be like a general group, or does it have to
Yeah,
be?
a group works.
I say like in recent memory, a lot of the terrestrial phyros are actually extremely fun to make. There's not like any real life equivalent to them.
I think one of my favorites that immediately comes to mind is this burrowing species
Oh,
that
yeah.
goes underground and it kind of looks like a dolphin.
As you can
I
see,
call it a beanie weenie.
in the last page, there's descendants of them with like tentacles, which I plan to touch on. The tentacles are derived from basically hair follicles. They aren't very strong, but they do provide a base of like derivation for many things. They can, such as keratin plates, and the like. What's gastronomy? They the sapien monkeys generally eat like meat, like anything they can catch. I'll send a picture of them hunting things later. Yeah, there's actually no fungi. It was a mistake at first, but I'm sticking with it.
Someone asked why monkeys.
Good question, actually. This goes back to like 2 years ago when I started it. It stemmed from like a really stupid idea that I decided to expand on. It was one of the monkeys with 3 legs, if you can see. Okay, which is the best named one? Hop. Oh, my moves. Oh, you're right. I'll show that later. Oh well, there's the boards in like the river picture. That's the closest thing. No, don't envy.
Right. Now that we're kind of 5 minutes into the break, I'm going to open more questions and answers for some other presentations that might not have had question and answer time.
Okay, yeah.
Just due to the schedule. So it's a free for all. If somebody's got a question and somebody's done a presentation, go nuts, start asking.
I guess this is a question I have for for several people who the people who said that they're interested in making books someday. Like, what type of book would you be interested in making? Like, would it be like a field guide, or would it have stories? Or I know Dan, if he's still in here, he is not. But anyways, he talked about his authorhood. But like, I'm curious for other aspiring authors. Like, what do you want your book to be?
Currently, sorry, you can go.
Oh, it's okay. You can go first.
Okay. Currently, I want to do an art book of I guess the general species of the planet, and then do an anthology series of stories of the people from the planet. I have a couple characters in mind, so I guess that's kind of what I have planned.
Nice.
It's actually pretty similar to what I'm doing in a way. The current plan right now, and the first one should be coming out in a month or two, is actually a short novel I've been working on for the last year and a half, really. And these short novels will be taking it will be from the perspective of a second sophant species on Earth throughout history. And the first book will be taking place in the earliest Pleistocene and the first encounter between humans and the second sophant species.
Ooh, that sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
I'm actually planning to create a manga series taking place on an alternate Earth.
Hell yeah.
We need more speculative manga or manga. Sorry.
The alternate Earth is basically one where dinosaurs survived the KPG due to the KPG never actually happening. It's in fact a little alternate reality on my own speculative biology project, The New Dinosaurs Revised, which is an alternate timeline branching off from when the Sophists actually did not make a compromise to abandon Earth and only leave the native races, or native Sophists in. And so basically is now in the middle of a world war with two nations fighting against each other. And also with other incredible stuff. I kind of plan 3 titles of these books.
Christian, I think I told. Sorry, go ahead.
Was somebody else about to speak there?
The newer dinosaurs.
Yes, the newer.
Yeah, I had an idea once. I probably won't make it into anything, but it would basically be what if the KPG extinction happened during the Jurassic period, like towards the end of the Jurassic period.
Just gonna quickly make some comments on some of the presentations I didn't get to say much on as they passed by quite fast. I really liked Zach's presentation because it included both Pseudotsuchians and dragons. So I know you can go too in depth into the world, but I found that bit quite excellent. With Tala's presentation, it's kind of existentially terrifying, the idea of just enjoying finding a place to die to become a fruit tree.
I thought that part was really interesting.
Absolutely fascinating, but as I say, a little existentially terrifying in a way.
Oh yeah.
Very Dawkinsian.
I've been driven into a crisis a couple times already.
It's very Dickensian.
Yeah, I tried not to think
Live,
about that
die.
when she mentioned it.
Live, die, make a pretty corpse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's been loads of good presentations today, and obviously we could kind of sense that the next presentation is going to be book publishing themed. So just
it's cool stuff.
So many good presentations. Yeah, cool stuff. Oh, right. It is 1 minute till the next presentation. Is everybody more or less getting ready and settled and all that other stuff?
Yes, let me switch to my computer. Have that queued up. I'll
Speaking
leave
of
and come right back.
old stuff, do you want to see the old run key is so bad?
Show us an old run key.
It's like my first run key I ever drew. It's so bad. It's 2020.
I share my screen now and make sure it's working and everything.
Okay.
Y'all can see this? Let's move that up there.
My eyeballs doth perceive.
Can I hide that message?
We are
Sound
on the
good
hour
now?
now, so whenever you're ready, start presenting.
All right.
This book is in my room.
So, my name is Christian Cline, for people who don't know me. I am a BFA graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm a professional illustrator, and author, and the creator of the Teeming universe, which I'll be talking about today. So, I think it's important to first talk about what is the Teeming universe, because not everyone may know. So, not to get very poetic on its origins or anything like that, but Teeming universe is essentially the manifestation of something that I wanted to do for most of my life, which is to make a book about alien creatures and their worlds. Like most of you, I would imagine, you are inspired by the likes of people such as Wayne Barlow, Dougal Dixon, the other people like Gert Van Dijk, C.M. Kozman, Glenn, who made Serena. I forgot his last name. But regardless, I wanted to make one for many years, and aside from just happy sketchbooks that I called like quote unquote field guides, I want to make something professional. And its beginnings, it kind of started out as a fluke. I was hanging out in my bedroom just watching YouTube videos, and I randomly stumbled upon a video by the YouTuber Jillian Perkins, who is a self-publishing advocate and like a businesswoman. Her channel has nothing to do with science or speculative biology, but I found her information really useful and went down this kind of rabbit hole. And I was like, I actually can do this. I actually can make a book. And I had ideas for one, but I never really played around with it until I knew it was actually possible. And long story short, here it is. The Teeming Universe is a paperback book on Amazon, which you can get more than 300 pages long. It took 2.5 years. It was a really big commitment. And I published it in September of last year. I wrote everything in it. I painted everything in it, obviously. And I published it. And its premise is it revolves around 11 total worlds, their solar systems, planetary characteristics, life, anatomy, and so on and so forth. So, one thing that I wanted to capture in the Teeming universe was a, shall I say, like, diversity of worlds that have been conceptualized by other people, giving my own spin and my own artistic direction. A lot of these ideas are ones that have been thought of before, like a tidally locked planet, an ocean world, or et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to play around with that and conceptualize how would it actually be if it was in our universe. And that's what the Teeming universe aims to do. The Teeming universe doesn't have any story or any set narrative. It is a more or less like a chronological journey devoid of characters that take us across the galactic neighborhood in the range of about 10,000 light years or less. And it takes us through almost a dozen worlds showing their life and things like that. And this is a 2-page spread from the same universe as towards the ends, and it shows the worlds that you would see in it. Such examples would include Planet Kraylon, which is this one here, Chapter 7, which is a world that's been occupied by machines, and their origins are very unknown and ambiguous, but it's heavily implied that they killed off whoever was there. But I didn't get into that for ambiguity reasons. There's also worlds like Planet World, Chapter 9, which is a Alouatta planet, which I have my own take on for people who may have it. In terms of the book's layout, I will actually be leaving here, and I will go here. This is it's not as updated. I did change the headers. I got rid of those, but everything else is identical to what you would find in a copy of my book. And each chapter kind of it follows a similar order. It's meant to echo the style and art direction of your typical workbook that you may read in high school or even college, just about these alien creatures that don't exist. Each chapter begins with a 2-page spread that introduces us to this new planet with these astronaut characters who are just visual aids to show progression and chronology. They're not doing anything, they're just visual aids. You can see, chapter title on the left, statistics chart on the right. Go further. When I was making each chapter, I wanted to have kind of a narrow down approach. So each chapter would be first focusing on the planet itself and the solar system at large. So, a couple pages devoted to that and its major characteristics. And then we narrow it down by going, let's see, next slide, to like the features of the planet itself, if there's anything worthy of note. Landscapes across the world and creatures that are in each of them. And then it narrows down to the creatures and their features and characteristics and how they interact with the environment that I previously introduced. Further. Then we get into things like anatomy here, and then a couple other creatures. For each chapter, I went about the third section by going into 2 different plants and 2 other animals. And in the animals half of the chapter, there's one primary creature. So now that we have kind of a grasp on the layout and what my book is and why it exists and things like that, now I'm going to quickly run down a couple of the worlds that you would see if you grabbed a copy. Manir, the Cold World, which is the first world in the book, chapter 1. It is a chapter that I like a lot because it is something that you would more than likely find if you were an astronaut or something and you were going to these alien worlds. You're more likely not going to find like huge monsters or something, or at least maybe not the first time. That's what my book kind of aims to do. It's like subverting expectations. This is a habitable, quotes, world that is the 4th of 4 planets orbiting a G-type star Manira at a distance of 230 million miles. It is a super Earth. It is almost 3 times the Earth's mass, and it is very cold. Obviously, it orbits really far away, and it has an average temperature of more than 50 or less than 50 degrees Celsius. Its core is partially dead, meaning that parts of the magnetic field are inconsistent and weak overall. And ultraviolet radiation basically bakes the icy surface and things like that. What's interesting about it is there is liquid water in very sparse quantities, like you may see here on this certain feature, and that's because there is hydrogen peroxide imbued in the water, making a supercritical solution, and it is replenished biologically by these creatures called manure files here. This is pretty much what you would expect if you're going to find like alien life like right now. More than likely, you know, as cool as like Godzilla or some like enormous whatever, maybe this is probably the realistic part, but I wanted to include it because it helps show that, hey, you know, microbiology is really cool too. And there's a lot of cool things about these that may not be visible at first, but you know, if you read, then you'll see some cool things about it. They have a very interesting fundamental or a set of fundamental differences compared to, you know, bacteria that you would find on Earth. For one, they need hydrogen peroxide to prevent themselves from freezing, and that has its own litany of issues such as hydroxylation, which is let me see, I forgot how to spell it, but it's basically when hydrogen peroxide breaks down molecules, and they get around that by having silane composition, meaning like they're not silicon based entirely, they're carbon based, but they use silicon and carbon together to prevent hydroxylation. And it's a delicate balance because they don't want to die from ingesting hydrogen peroxide, but they don't want to freeze from not having enough of it. So these, you know, these hardy creatures, quote unquote, are the best that Manir has to offer, but they're still really cool in their own way. And they outdate Earth's biosphere by 500 million years. Terrea, the ocean world, which is the world that you saw in the previous PDF, is the third chapter. It is a huge planet, actually the second biggest in the book, almost 7 times Earth's mass. It is the fourth of 6 planets orbiting an F star called Ba, and it has 8 moons in a ring system. Terrea is not an ocean world in the conventional sense of like Kepler 22b or GJ 1214b, in the sense that the worlds are partially water, like a large portion of their composition, like 10 or 15%. Instead, it's not the case. Terrea is a silicate planet, like Earth, meaning that water accounts for very little of its composition in the range of 0.05, which is why Terrea has twice the gravity that Earth does. Its surface, it has a couple of land masses like what you can see right here and here. They're very few and far between, obviously, and they're really devoid of much life at all because life would prefer not to, you know, go out into the harsh sun and the nearly constant hurricanes that are virtually across the world. Instead, life's just content living down there. One phylum that I go into for chapter 3 is Cetiochethides, which is Fesh, I call them, Phesh. Get it? Haha. And one specific family is called Pelagonarians, or Pelags for short. They are interesting in that they look like fish, obviously, but they also have some major differences. One thing that really sets them apart, like what Heath brought about yesterday, mentioning in passing, is they have trilateral symmetry. They evolved from a trilateral common ancestor, meaning threefold radial symmetry, we all know. And some did, you know, some more derived versions became more bilateral, but at the end of the day, they all have threefold internal symmetry. They have copper oxide blood, making theirs blue instead of red like for us. They lack jaws, instead using bony hooks attached to muscular fixtures on the roofs of their mouths. And that was inspired by bobbit worms, which are really cool. I'm going to speed up a little bit here. Ites, which is chapter 4, is a dry planet, sort of like a hybrid between Earth and Mars in a way. It orbits a K-class star. It has 2 moons, and it's drier, colder, and dustier. It is a creature that I go into the most for that chapter, which is called a Hellerian. It's I like to compare them a lot to badgers. Like they're basically alien desert badgers, just large. They have sideways facing jaws. Um, the babies are really cute. If you saw on my Instagram, I posted that a long time ago, but that was a very fun illustration. And Yedu, which is now my favorite for reasons we'll get into, is the culmination, is the finale, I guess, to the Team Universe. It's the inhabited world. And get into the Yedu species, which is my Sophont species, we'll call it. They are descended from an arboreal, like, sort of like a gecko and a monkey, like, smushed together, something like that. Arboreal carnivores that walked on land and, you know, became intelligent. Their species almost was driven to extinction about 4,000 years ago due to an ecological disaster, which they thankfully averted. But that spurred them to colonize other worlds in the nearby solar system, their nearby solar system, about 10 of them. And now they are an interstellar species, and they, you know, have their own cultures and things, which is something that I'll be getting into next slide, which is the Eidolon Sagas. The Eidolon Sagas is something that I announced, I think, like a month and a half ago. I've been working on it since January. It is all about these guys, and it is basically a revamp of the biosphere in the world, and it is going to go much more in depth with the Eidolon species themselves, as well as going into characters and things of that sort, which I'll be explaining. Things like this have begun to really interest me, which is why I'm doing the book, is history. I've always been a history nerd, but I didn't get into it for the Teeming universe because that wasn't really applicable. But fortunately for the Eidolon Saga, it's going to be geared much more toward the history, which was very heavily condensed for just space purposes, because it's a really, you know, big book. So one thing that I am looking forward to the most, which I've been working on for a long time, is character. So the Team universe doesn't have any, right? Like, there's cool creatures in the book in Alien Worlds. Everyone's doing that, and that's not taking away from them, and that's awesome. But in thinking about it, I wanted to expand more, like, because I'm an artist, or I'm an illustrator, and I was like, how can I expand my work? And the solution is character. So for the Eidolon Sagas, I will be expanding into the lives of people throughout history, what they did in life, how their biology reflects in their cultures and things like that. Speculative culture and speculative history it's not in the forefront as much as biology itself, but I hope that I will be able to make my own impression on that. And you'll be able to see empires rising and falling and kind of having a historical precedent, which is something very unlike the first book. And you'll see into their, like, space age cultures. Really quick, I'm going to sum this up because I don't have much time. Making books. There are several things that, I think the thing that I want people to take the most from what I'm saying is, it is possible to do this, right? Like, I'm not a fluke in the sense that, like, I did something magical or insane to publish. Like, it's simple, but it's not easy, per se. It's just a lot of people don't know it exists, right? Things that I would want you to do, people who are aspiring to get into books: research print-on-demand publishers. I use Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, but people like Keenan Taylor used Ingram Spark. It's a much better option compared to traditional publishing because it's less expensive. The barrier of entry is a lot lower. And, you know, it's more possible. You have to be really detail-oriented, following rules and layouts and guides. That's mandatory, obviously, and you have to be really particular with how rules and things are set up. I'm going to try to wrap up here. And also involves planning out images, layouts, manuscripts. Learn the ins and outs of making images for books. I would say all of us who have projects and we showcase them online, right? Like DeviantArt or Instagram, whatever. it's a different case for books because you have to account for things like pagination or trim size, bleed, gutter, margins, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a whole other beast. You have to account for that yourself, um, so that you won't waste time. Preferably, obtain a copyright certificate. For people in Burgerland like myself, uh, we're fortunate in that once we make something, we have copyright automatically. Like the government recognizes that we made it, but it's important to have like that written down or have that like certified. So when you make something, have protection for yourself. Go to the copyright office and apply for it. Once you make it, actually, you can apply for it if you're still working on it, which is what I did for my book. And lastly, broadcast yourself. I was fortunate enough. Got 1 minute left. I was fortunate enough to work with people like Curious Archive, AZFK, Thought Potato, magazines, articles, stuff like that. Basically, none of that would have happened if I didn't reach out to them first, right? Um, the Bible says you have not because you ask not. So don't be afraid to ask because you don't know, right? The worst someone could say is no. Um, and more than likely, people are like, yeah, let's work together. And it works out. And hopefully, when it's your time to shine, then you'll shine really bright. And speaking of time, thank you for, lending me yours. I have been Christian Cline. You can find me on Instagram. That's just my name. It's my handsome face. I'm on DeviantArt. I don't post it often though. Um, you can find my book, The Teeming Universe, on Amazon.com. You should definitely buy it because it's awesome. Trust me. And you can keep up with updates revolving my next book, which is in production, the Yedo Sagas, via my social media, which is I have some big updates planned. So that is all for today.
Thanks very much. You're getting a lot of love in the chat. We shall move on to the next presentation, but we can circle back and get questions and answers after the presentations are over for the day, because there's like 10 minutes of chill time before it officially ends.
So is it my turn now?
It is indeed. Start presenting.
Okay. Can everyone see?
Yes, sir. We have visuals confirmed.
Okay. And I'll wait a bit for everyone to get on. Alright. So this is Sachiel. Project I've been working on for quite a while now. And just here we go. It's a world set near the end of a 5-parter, 14,000 year epic, and roughly 70 million years ago, an advanced alien civilization came through the solar system, and they would live there, but they eventually leave. Life was just making landfall on this world when they drained most of the oceans of Sachiel, and that left behind continental-sized salt flats that survive to this very day. This would be known as the Rapture, and the aliens who did this were to be called the Drainers. In life, having to evolve in such a rapidly changing environment, a lot of them died, and a lot of the oceans became anoxic for a while, the atmosphere thinned, and the plates, because how small this world is, would become too dry to move much. But even in the wake of this apocalypse, Sakillans would arise with new civilizations. This is the solar system for Sachiel. The bodies in Sachiel's system hold a naming convention of biblical angels, which has a lore reason, and each name appropriately fits like each planet's behaviors and origins. Let me get all these. I'll post them in chat. I'll let everyone read that a bit, but or y'all can read it later. So this was the world before the Rapture. This is a bit of an old map, and it's kind of crappy in my opinion, considered what it is now. But it used to have a lot more oceans. And this is some art I did that had like the Rapture in progress. And here's a little scuttler. And here we get to the modern day maps. And so I used a lot of photo bashing techniques. And a lot of the plants are rust colored or orange. And it's a bit of a desert world. You can see the ice caps here. And there's little water, but there's lots of like runoff and rivers coming down from mountain ranges, which affects the environment a lot and gives a lot of rainforests vibes, even despite how little water there actually is. And the Sophants started around here, and they would make their way across the world. And different colors means like, okay, red is the earliest in history, orange, yellow, blue, and then green, then blue, which marks different periods of exploration in their history. And here's so they had 2 world wars, but the First World War ended in a nuclear holocaust across multiple nations and killed a buttload of Sachielans. And here's the nuke map for that. Many of the countries had colonies and colonized much of these lands, and different colonies nuked each other, and so did some others. And then they went to space. So after a few decades, they were recovering from their nuclear apocalypse, and then one nation started developing rockets, just in case it happens again. They eventually get found out, so they have to put those rockets to use in space. So they get to space, and then they find the Drainer's alien relics and technology, and there's another world war, but they take more land and everything, and that also devastates the world. But after a while, they're fine. They recover. They have alien technology, but they discover that most of their solar system had been wiped clean of resources, so they have to look outwards to a new solar system if they want more mineral resources. These are the Sachielans themselves. They're hexapods or centaurs too. The largest are the males and the females, and then the babies are sexless. They don't gain a sex until sexual maturity. Their physiology is very different than that of humans, as you can tell by this lovely stick figure I drew. Um, babies can ride on the backs of their parents, or like females can ride on the backs of males, and use them as war mounts and just like, yeah. They're highly communal, which affects their society a lot, and they have different cliques that serve as important defining features of their identities. And different cliques have different levels of importance and governance, which eventually goes up to like a country level of governing. They're semi-subterrestrial, and they build a lot of mounds, and they don't have vocal cords. Their breathing holes or tubes are on their backs. So they use a lot of clicks with their beaks, pops, sign language, grinding with their beaks, and etc. And they're the first intelligent species that humanity meets, other than themselves. Here is a bit of an outdated cladogram of Sachiel life forms. I'll let everyone see for a minute. This is the earliest ancestor that I've drawn or described, and one lineage turns into like spine worms. This lineage is tripedal, but they have waveform symmetry, so their legs are on either side. This species digs through the sand, kind of like a graboid. Well, it was inspired by that. And then this side, here are the Sachielans themselves. Here's another species that uses their eyelids as communicative function, like displays. And then here's an aquatic lineage, diving from this one, that becomes whales. I have a couple scenes that I drew. I'm not the best artist on paper, and I didn't feel like digitalizing all this, so make of that what you will. But here's a couple species chasing each other. Here's a Sachielin foraging through a firewood tree.
Just a quick warning, you're on your last minute, so show us these scenes and
Okay. I didn't realize I was already... Okay, my bad. Here's another scene. This is a world over that was terraformed by humanity and settled. There was a seed ship fleet that carried embryos of hundreds of thousands of species, and that included humanity, apes, and they were taught by Soviet robots, which is this world that I showed earlier. There's different influences and stuff. There's the modern day countries. Earth, basically. Alright. So, you may be asking what happened to Earth during these 14,000 years. Well, in short, there were a few, really massive reformation waves that ended up with most countries being led by super intelligent AI after the singularity. And the singularity would happen with Lucille, the inventor, who made the first ever Soviet robot, Zophiel, which is known as the Arbiter. Lucille and Zophiel would rise to become some of the most influential people in history, as well as being regarded as their own religious figures, known as the Holy Binary. And eventually a church gets set up in their name with many sects dedicated to them and are collectively called the Zophist churches. After countries started to be controlled by AI governments, said AI would begin working on stuff to eliminate poverty, start reversing climate change, and a load of other stuff. After that, most jobs were being automated by non-intelligent robots, science would flourish, people would begin to live the utopian dream. Space colonization would soon start after space colonization would soon start after that, and it would be built upon asteroid mining infrastructure. Eventually, a few species of apes would get uplifted into sapience and join humanity and robots as civilians. However, a little while later, the simian flu would come and decimate the world's population, eventually forcing a lot of the uninfected peoples in mass exodus to the stars onto lunar and cislunar colonies. These evacuations were done in waves over decades, and most people were evacuated, though some still remained in quarantine cities. It's a bit hand-waved, but eh. So, here's that timeline I shared a bit of a teaser of. I'll post a screenshot of it in chat so that everyone can see it. I'm gonna go ahead because time is running short. Just in short, all the Earth stuff happens, then space colonization, and then the journey to Kalos, because some people got tired of waiting to come back to Earth. So some people set out into the stars and made various interstellar pit stops. These segments are not to scale. And they eventually find one and start seeding a world. And a couple hundred years after that, they meet the Sachielans. And here is Earth at the beginning of the mass exoduses. There's a lot of federations. The U.S., the Anglosphere reunited with Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. The Nordic Union, Russia kind of got balkanized. Siberian republics, China got balkanized a bit too. There's a lot more federations like the Central Asian Federation. There's a couple of Arabic leagues, more Muslim nations, and then the French Commonwealth, East African Federation, which is not so east anymore, Ethiopia, also South America mainly united except for French Guinea, which is still a part of the French Commonwealth, and Ethiopia also invaded Eritrea to regain a coastline, because I thought it'd be funny to include that. And after the Exodus, whenever space colonization started, they colonized the moon. Sorry for the bad picture quality. I had to rescale it to fit. Each of the colors are color coded to this map. And then here's a work in progress of Mars in the modern day, which is like 14,000 years in the future, when everything's settled. And here's all that. You can ask me about the setting now. In case anyone has any questions.
I have a question. About the different countries on Mars. How did you go about that? Because
Okay, so since the let me go back to Mars. Okay, since the federations here, they're headed by really stable AI governments, and like humans aren't in government anymore. So AI are doing all the stuff while humans live, lives of leisure. So they're really stable. They cooperate with each other for the most part. And like there's a secret that the Holy Binary can actually control most of the AI governments, because they had a little bit of a failsafe. And so since these were all really stable, they were able to these federations were able to survive. And like these space ones, they are formed out of confederations of different new space identities. So yeah.
So it's a pretty utopian world in that regard then?
Pretty much.
Okay, nice.
I have, let's see how many. I have 49 main pages, but this hasn't been updated since March. And then of the human history, I have 16 pages. So
Pretty great stuff.
There's a lot of work.
Cool. Yeah, nice.
I have a question.
I always appreciate it when speculative biology projects also go into the political world building aspect of it.
Agreed. I love
Thank
history.
you.
Yeah, and sorry for the person who I cut off.
That's all right. Just curious, are you a fan of Deus Ex?
The what?
Deus Ex vibes. Deus Ex, like the game?
No. I can't say I've heard of that.
Okay, it's just like an old it was a really popular game, and it kind of deals with similar things like AI controlling government, and like it has a lot of religious themes as well. It's fun. I played it as a kid.
A lot of the themes in this 5-parter epic is like kind of based off my life, so it has a lot of symbolism and everything. So it means quite a bit to me. Let me see.
It shows for sure.
Alright, let me just see if anyone else has any questions.
I have one actually.
Yeah.
So, with the Sophons, sorry, I forgot what the planet is called, and I don't know how to say it, even if I did remember it. Go ahead.
Can you repeat that?
I forgot what the planet is called, so I forget what the Sophons are called, but
Sachiel villains.
Okay. So what exactly defines their cliques in their culture? And what exactly do their cliques do?
Okay, so basically their cliques are like highly specialized like friendship groups, which their culture is a bit different, and their cliques are kind of like their friends and families, but they can have multiple of them. And different cliques depend, like they're called cliques because depending on which one you belong to, that's kind of like that kind of defines like where you are in society a bit. So yeah.
Interesting. And are they so you said that they don't develop like any dimorphism until they're adults. Does that mean that they're hermaphrodites?
A bit,
as
yeah.
children?
Mhm.
Okay. Huh. Sweet.
They'd be sequential hermaphrodites in that case.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Or sequential dehermaphrodites.
I have some art that I'm gonna post in the Specposium banter so that y'all can look at it. Yeah.
We're on to our final presentation now, which is Forrest, I believe.
Yeah, hold on, let me get my alt in here to throw up the stream. Go live. All right, can we see it?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, cool. All right, don't mind me on streams, make sure it's working. But all right, so I'm here to present to you the ancient Martians. We know what Mars is like in the present. It's a dead dust ball. But I want to ask you, what do you think it was like in the past? Humanity for a long time has been looking at Mars and being like, who's out there? What's there? We recently found out that there was actually a possibility for life to be there. I took an astronomy class and got a little obsessed with it, and that's where this project came from. It was originally going to be snapshots of Mars history, but I decided to show you my favorite little guys from Mars instead. Well, we gotta start with the background info, though. I had to change the timeline. As we know, Mars probably didn't look like this at all, or at least not for very long. It only has a third of Earth's gravity, which lets some of these creatures get big, huge, and also fly maybe when they shouldn't. It's always been pretty chilly there. There's always been ice caps, and the animals do reflect this when they're finally able to colonize the colder parts of the land and the sea. And Mars has a really high CO2. Because of its weak gravity, it's always losing its atmosphere, but I have it so in its early days, when it was volcanically active, all these volcanoes were helping and replacing all that atmosphere. but probably not a good environment if you have to breathe oxygen. Oops, I skipped too far. So here are some of my really early animals. These guys are from like Cambrian type explosion type deal. Up here, we got the pill. He's an arthropod-like creature, of course. They were set ahead from most of the other creatures because they have little compound eyes. Everyone else here just has eye spots. The core is a starfish-like in shape, but not in behavior. They sit in the water column and grab food out of it with their little sticky hands. The squig, he's basically like the closest thing to an early chordate. He actually has like a spine in there. Well, sort of, like a notochord. And he's able to like actually swim around freely in the water column. And this beautiful creature is a beant. He is a bottom dweller, and he crawls around on his little legs and forages from stuff from the bottom. But we're going to get to my favorite animals of them all. Prepare yourself for when skrunks ruled Mars. So what is a skrunk? I'm just saying words at you. That's not a thing. A skrunk? Well, skrunks are amphibious and later completely terrestrial relatives of the core, the starfish-like dude. So they have 5 legs, arms, whatever, and 5 eyes and a central mouth. And these skrunks were the most successful at taking over the land alongside the arthropod-like pills. They don't have a fun Mars name. They're basically just bugs. But other core relatives were able to leave the water, and they are basically just kind of like a sea anemone, but on land. But the skrunks are the ones who are really able to fill most of like the terrestrial niches that you would expect for like a vertebrate. They're really successful, and I want to show you some species that I've created that you would find at a period roughly analogous to the late Carboniferous. It's hard to frame this as a completely Mars, I'm from Earth. So this is the skrunko. He's the one that all the others got their name from. He's the representative. This is like the most basal guy. Like as soon as they got land adaptations, they looked like this. They're generalists. They eat anything and everything. They're also not terrible like in the water, so they go in there too. And they're amphibious. They gotta lay their eggs in there. And I'm not the best at showing texture, but kind of imagine him like he's kind of slimy like a frog. So that like helps explain his water dependency. Here's a ribby. They're another small amphibious skunk species. They retain more of the super sticky mucus pads on their feet, like their ancestors, and they use it to climb and escape from predators like large arthropods and other skrunks. Their feeding arm, their little trunk, is like kind of like a spring, and they use it to catch really small insects. It's also really sticky. How convenient. We have the Scarolus, which is the only predator I have here. Well, predator of anything bigger than a bug. He's small but efficient, and anything he can get his claws into, they're gonna eat. It's around the size of a fox, so it prefers smaller prey, but with those sharp little claws, it can get into the hard exoskeletons of bigger bugs if they are weakened for some other reason. And this is the first species here that can actually live fully terrestrially, because they can lay their eggs outside of water. Here we have a Horphagon. They feed on low-growing plants. They really like moss. It's easy to pick with their little trunk, and it grows everywhere, so it's a great food source. Their name comes from the strange noise they can make that kind of sounds like horf. That's the easiest way I can do it. The real best way is if you kind of hold in a sneeze, because they use their nostrils to make it, but I'm not going to demonstrate. And finally, we got the Vibrogon. He is probably one of the biggest creatures, one of the biggest skunk species. The bugs are still bigger at this point. He can feed from really tall plants with his trunk, and it's brightly colored to signal to others of their species.
I'm just letting you know you are on your final minute now.
Oh, okay. I only got a couple slides. Do you want to see more skunks? And I have my other species more featured on the website. Like if you want to see more of the beets, you can find it on the website. I will link that in the Discord chat when I am done. And while it's unfinished, I think there's some good stuff on there. And if you would like to check it out, I'd be very happy. Also, sometimes I post on Twitter. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Just a quick comment. I think your naming system is possibly the best. All these animals have possibly the best names I've ever heard.
That's way better than mine. Beat is great. Wish I came up with that.
Beat.
On a beat.
You gotta put yourself into the mindset of somebody who has just seen an animal for the first time. Like if you're a person who just saw a frog for the first time, what would you call it? That helps with naming them like this.
I do that sometime.
So, do we have any questions?
Do they eat from their middle?
Yeah, they have a mouth on their center, kind of like a starfish.
Beat plushie here.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm in the echo.
Yeah, bean plushie. I'm an advocate.
Send me Echo Gecko. See if you can get on it.
Yes, a beat plushie, please.
Yeet.
I do have a
towards a beat plushie.
Yeet, write this down. Write this down, oh mystical orb.
I do have a question actually. Did you also go into plants, or is it only the animals?
I have plants, but I know a lot less about them, so they're still like highly in development.
All right. Well, as long as they're as cute as the animals, it's fine.
I mean, that goes without saying. Like, I don't know what you mean. That's not up for debate.
As it's set on Mars, would you be up for having the red weed, like in War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells? It says like Martian plants are the red weed.
Oh yeah, all of the plants are orange and red. That's I figure because they're further away from the sun, they get a little bit more red light, and they just are like, maybe we need to hold back on that. Because plants got to balance their need for light and not getting burnt up by it. Like I said, I'm not a plant guy, but I'm figuring it out. The Skrunky.
Team Scrunky for life.
So the day's more or less over now, but if you had any things that you wanted to finish off, Schwefel's just finished off their presentation, so if anybody else has last-minute bits of their presentations that they were unable to do for time, or if anybody has any questions about anything from the past 2 days, now's the time to all get it out and mingle and...
I throw something out there. Well, I just want to ask him because it's really the part that I wanted to focus on the most with my presentation in particular. Do any of you happen to have any questions about publishing or how to like self-publish? Because something that I've become really advocate of, and I'm trying to spread awareness. Which was the whole point of my presentation. Not just like, if anyone has any questions about that, that'd be great. If you have any.
I do.
Okay.
So basically, like, how do you just go about like finding like how would you go about finding like, for example, I know that your books are self-published, but like how would you go about like finding a publisher in the first place? Of which, you know, okay, I could have luck here, or is it just like random like writing emails at random publishers and hoping for the best?
Okay, so basically your question is how did I find out about my publisher that I went through, right?
In a nutshell, yes.
Okay. So that goes back to when I found Jillian Perkins' channel. She's not the only person that talks about self-publishing, but that's just the one I found at that time. I did a lot of research, so like 6 weeks of like research into print-on-demand publishers. That's the term. Print-on-demand publishing is different from traditional publishing, like working with a publishing house, right? It's different because, like in a traditional publishing house route, you're having a contract with them, and oh, bless you. And there's like an inventory and a warehouse and stuff. Print-on-demand publishing is different because it's print-on-demand, as the name says. So you have a PDF and you have a copy of the PDF sent to in this case, Amazon. And when someone orders a book, the PDF is printed, so there's no inventory, and you're trying to make your money back. Instead, the printing cost is deducted from the list price, so it's not like why it's not as expensive. Actually, it's not really expensive at all. The only thing actually I paid for the process of making my book was my copyright certificate.
Okay.
Now, in terms of finding people, that just goes to researching online. That's really all I can say. Like I said, there are several, and they have varying degrees of success. I was talking to Keenan Taylor, who made the Chimera project that you guys know, I hope. He published a book, of course. He used Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark. Didn't use Ingram Spark, but based on what he says, it went well. But that requires a lot of research on your part because they have specifications that are specific to them, and that has to factor in with making illustrations for books and things like that. So research.
Okay.
I'm gonna post an invite link to the Spec Forum Discord, specifically to my channel where I talk about Sachiel.
Yes.
Sweet.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Christian, would you be okay if we came up with questions about publishing like later on? Process of making a book? Cool.
Sorry, I just have to add this in there. As I've been recording these last few Q&A segments, I've been scrolling through a meme channel, and I didn't realize any time I click on an audio-visual meme, it actually gets captured in the recording. So you'll probably want to switch to our other guys recording for this bit.
Got to capture the memes.
Very nice.
You're our only hope now.
Entertain the viewer.
Well, we've got a sort of range of recording now because we've got the Henry's still recording the audio. Well, what was until 10 minutes ago, and then we've got Zach recording everything, and then we've got your Heath's recording with added memes. So we will get a good recording for the entire thing. So I think, unless anyone's got any more comments, I think that's the end of the second spec. I hope we've all had a fabulous time. There's been some amazing presentations this year, and we will get a lot of editing done to get the presentations into a YouTube video, and we will post that online and let everybody know when that's posted. So yeah.
This was great. It was definitely a highlight to my week. Like, you guys have awesome projects. I'm glad I've been introduced to some people. Like, it's good. Like, I didn't know a lot of these people were out here, so definitely keep it up, guys.
I feel like Specposium is a good way for the community to come together without being at each other's throats.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
There's a lot of fighting and go ahead.
Because I mean, like, a lot of people, like, I mean, we all know we're in the community, but like, we can definitely fall in the trap of getting into needless like arguments about creatures that don't exist, right? But it's good that it's a nice, wholesome time, just sharing our work and showing it off to people.
Well, I hope we see everyone next year. If people are still recording, I think this is a good time to stop recordings, otherwise you will be recording banter forever.